Joe Rogan Podcast. Check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
Hello, folks. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for coming.
I'm glad we didn't make it snow
You
again
almost
in
did.
Texas.
I mean,
it
it
was
can
close.
snow. It might snow today. It's very possible because it was drizzling when I left the house and it was 30 degrees. So, which is not supposed to happen. It's supposed to be snow.
Hopefully it won't be the snowpocalypse part 2.
Yeah, last time you were supposed to come, it became a complete disaster. But it was fun. It was fun to watch people slide around and know that this city has zero infrastructure in terms of like dealing with snow. It's kind of because I grew up in Massachusetts where it's they know how to handle snow. Out here they're baffled.
Do you want to? Tell them what happened with you.
Well. So my flight I'm from Boston, and my flight from Houston to Austin was canceled. So I got the last SUV. You don't know how much I wanted to be on your show. I got the last SUV, drove through the ice storm to Austin, where there was like just dead cars. It was like zombie apocalypse. Got to a Marriott around the corner from here, and thought, well, at least I'll be able to walk, if nothing else. And my room overlooked this on-ramp, and I just, every day for a week, with no running water and no bottled water, watched the cars just slide up and down. And then I finally went out to Robb's house, where he at least had a pool for running toilets.
Flushing the toilets.
But I was living on basically like White Claw and canned tuna.
Oh my God! This was when you were supposed to be here.
Yeah.
Last year.
Oh my God!
I still have a can of Wolf chili
That I
she
got at a
bought
gas
here,
station.
but she didn't have a can opener, and she was just like, I don't know how to get into this thing. So.
The thing is, it's if you grew up in a place that has winter, like Massachusetts, you're like, this is nothing. Mm-hmm. Like, guys, this is a normal winter day. Like, what the fuck? And it killed this place for a solid week.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I still came, because I was like, they're overreacting. It's just 1 or 2 inches of snow, but I didn't realize it was going to be like misting ice.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah, but, I mean, come on. How much are trucks? Like, take care of this, guys. Get some sand. Like, is that hard? I mean, it happens. It does happen. I mean, the idea that you just, like, shut everything down for a year, how much does that cost? Seems like trucks are less expensive than whatever that costs.
Yeah, and all the poor people that didn't know you can't heat your house with a stove.
Well, worse. People use
Yeah.
grills.
Yeah.
Yeah, they used, like, barbecue grills in their house, and they burnt wood, and they died.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people got sick.
Yeah, that was bad news. And we were in the process of packing our house to move because we moved March 3rd up to Kalispell. So, like, all of this chaos is going on, and we didn't know if, like, the moving truck was getting in. And then Diana made it to our place, and then we weren't sure if she was making it out of there. Like, it was, first world problems, but kind of sketchy first world problems as far as they go.
It lets you know that there's a thin veneer of civilization that keeps all the food on the shelves and all the cars moving, and it's not much. It's not much to throw it off.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm glad this is a good time to talk about your book. The book is Sacred Cow, Diana Rodgers and Robb Wolf. It's available right now. The Case for Better Meat. All I've been eating since January is meat. All I've been eating is meat and fruit. That's my diet: meat, fruit, and eggs. I've never felt better. I've done this before in the past, but I never stuck with it. I would do like that carnivore month of January. I did it like 2 years ago. I lost 12 pounds. I looked great. I felt great. Then I started eating spaghetti again.
Shocker.
I get fat, and then my joints hurt again. And that's the thing that drives me. It's the most wild, rather, is my joints feel so good. Like, everything feels better when I'm not eating foods that cause inflammation. And for me, there's something, I'm not advocating this for everybody, but a meat-based diet for me is 100%, at least in a short term. I've never done it for like years. I know like Sean Baker and a few of those guys have done it for years and years, Paul Saladino. But for me, short term, there's nothing that's made me feel better. And I can't imagine it would fuck me up long term. I take a lot of vitamins. I do eat a lot of fruit. I'm exercise. My exercise is great. I feel healthy. I have plenty of energy. I avoided all the diarrhea because when I just did only meat, I had ridiculous diarrhea, like astounding. As my friend Tom Segura put it, when he tried it, he goes, "This diarrhea is astounding." I'm like, "Yes, that's a good way to put it."
I was following that, and I was like, at some point there may need to be an intervention, like somebody like dropping you some Imodium or something. Yeah, that sounded
Well, there's something
rough.
about like eating a lot of fatty meat only.
Right.
That your body's like, what is all this? Like, where's the veggies? Like you always eat veggies. How come
Right.
how come there's no spaghetti here? Where's the bread?
Yeah, so as a dietitian, to be talking about things like this is definitely blasphemy.
Blasphemy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I get pushed back like crazy from fellow dietitians. It's,
But what do they say? What's the goal, right? Isn't the goal to feel better, to look better, and to perform better? So if you're eating food that makes you feel better, look better, and perform better, I mean, I was at 205 when I started this diet. Now I weigh 195, and it's only been 2 months, and I feel great. Like, I'm not starving. I just lost weight. It just went away. I got my six-pack back. Like, I feel better. My joints feel better. Like, I just feel better. Like, isn't that the goal? Like, the whole goal of your diet is supposed to be the vitality of your body, right?
right. And the whole goal of science should be to question your bias and seek the truth.
Well, I know Sean Baker was telling me that there's a large study that's going on that Harvard's putting on for the carnivore diet. Do you know about that?
They have some preliminary data on it, and I mean, it's not a randomized control trial. There's not a control group. It's a survey, and so it can be very critical of surveys. But it's interesting. Like 94% of the people that did it got off of the medications that they were on, like entirely, and it went through and detailed like some blood sugar changes. Blood sugars improved dramatically for the vast majority of people. They saw lipids improve. Not everybody. Some people on kind of a higher fat carnivore type diet, they see their lipids go up. We're still not sure what the total, net risk is with that, but it's pretty impressive. And again, people will poke holes in that, but there was a time in the 1940s, 1950s when there wasn't this thing called the Mediterranean diet. Then this guy wrote a review paper about it. And nothing really happened for, 8-10 years. But then more people started writing about it. More people started talking about it. Now we have randomized control trials and we have all kinds of different interventions. And we have some proof that something like a Mediterranean type diet is probably pretty healthful for a lot of people. So when people criticize this stuff and they just dismiss it out of hand, they're like, well, there's no research on it. Okay, that's fine. But this is where things begin. And it's usually observational. That, okay, there's this group of people that seem to be getting these really remarkable results. And the thing that was so interesting to me, my background was in autoimmunity and cancer research. And I got into this because of gut and autoimmune issues. I'm the person that came up with the autoimmune paleo diet. Like, I'm the person that kind of, formalized that initially. And it works pretty well. But when I saw what people were doing on a carnivore diet, it just blew me away. Like, people who had done every other thing, and they were so sick, they were crippled from gut and autoimmune issues. They would go on this modified, carnivore type diet and put their problems into remission and then have really remarkable health at the end of that. And it was a few people initially, but as it has grown, it's become this like really watershed moment. And I don't think that a carnivore diet is like the first whistle stop somebody should do in dietary change. There's a lot of other shit you could do before that. But if you're really sick, I think to both of y'all's points, if you're really sick and you're trying to improve things, like it seems like a reasonable thing to use as an intervention. It's like playing darts and you're just trying to get closer to the bullseye, and you can use that as a beginning point. Some people add in fruit, like Paul Saladino has added in more fruit and honey and stuff like that. Sean Baker is an absolute beast, and he wouldn't be caught dead eating fruit, and it just seems to work for him. But I think that it's a reasonable place to at least start and begin tinkering with things, and maybe you stick with it long term, or maybe you modify it down the road.
Well, it's got to be a function of different requirements for different people's bodies, right? Different people ask more of their body, like a guy like you who does a lot of jiu-jitsu, that's very physical. Some people don't. Some people, they just hike, and maybe they could have a different diet. There's a lot of different things that a person needs depending upon their lifestyle. But when you talk about like a Mediterranean diet, specifically, what is a Mediterranean diet? Like, what's in there?
that's the kind of funny thing. I mean, you've got what the literature kind of says, and then you have what people actually eat. And what folks actually eat is a lot of fatty fish, a lot of like lamb and goat, and they definitely eat some legumes. They eat local fruits and vegetables, a lot of olive oil. But it looks it's not this so like grain-centric, thing that is typically portrayed in modern dietetics.
Is there like is there a protocol for the Mediterranean diet? Like if someone says, I'm going on the Mediterranean diet, what do they mean? Are they eating lettuce? Do they have vegetables?
Usually Mediterranean diet means emphasis on seafood, lean meats, low-fat dairy to some degree. Legumes as kind of a preponderance for the carbs, like usually in preference to grains, although they'll have some grains in the mix too. But that's kind of the funny thing.
Vegetables?
Good amount of vegetables, yeah.
Okay.
Olives, olive oil.
So it's essentially like a primal diet.
Yeah.
Like the idea is just to cut out processed foods.
Yeah.
Which is always a good step one, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but then when you look at what people in the Mediterranean actually eat, it's a made-up diet. It's not really a diet. I've been to Spain. They eat a lot of pork. And pork is like not okay on a Mediterranean diet.
It's not? Why is it not okay? Isn't it a fatty meat?
Fatty fish is okay, but not fatty meat.
So you have what people are actually doing versus kind of what's been canonized within dietetics, and they're really different. And also to Diana's point, like what folks are doing in Spain is reasonably different than what they're doing in Greece and Italy and whatnot. Just kind of a granular level. But that just as an aside, the only food I think that is common to all of the blue zones is pork, but nobody ever mentions that.
Really?
Yeah. It's literally the only food that, from Costa Rica to, I guess the only one that it's not part of would be like the Seventh-day Adventists. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a weird one, right? That one is the when people want to lump in all the blue zones, like they always like to use Seventh-day Adventists because they're vegetable-based.
Right.
But they also no alcohol, no cigarettes, and daily exercise.
Right.
Yeah, and when you compare them to Mormons who have almost identical lifestyle, but they eat meat, it's same lifespan, but the Mormons are left out of the blue zones.
Why?
Because it didn't fit.
Doesn't fit the narrative.
Really? Plus, they're problematic because they're, their whole thing is a little wacky, and they get to have a lot of wives, or they used to.
And then when you look at Hong Kong, they have the highest meat consumption per capita and the longest lifespans.
Yeah, people don't like that one. They like to ignore that one.
So socioeconomics by far beats diet when you're looking at populations for longevity.
Socioeconomics do. So even someone with a poor diet but has a lot of money.
So they're going to have
like Trump?
Better access to health care.
Trump's a good example,
He's
right?
probably a good example, yeah.
I mean, he was 74. He got COVID, and he kicked in a few days. And he's really kind of chubby.
He's super chubby, yeah.
So people with more money generally have less stress. They don't work two jobs. So there's all these confounding factors when you're looking at these social connections.
Social connections helps? In what way? Like how do you define?
This stuff gets a little bit sketchy, but there's some research that suggests that people with inadequate social connectivity, like friends, family,
like loners,
kind of loners, but they're just socially isolated. That is as negative on health as a pack-a-day smoking habit. Now, that pack-a-day smoking habit gets thrown around a lot because people will say eating an egg is equivalent to smoking 6 cigarettes or something like that. But I think when you think about like human evolution and small group environments and stuff like that, there's something really powerful there, and it's clearly. You had Sebastian Junger on, and they talk about poorer communities tend to have more social connectivity, and you don't see suicides within these groups and whatnot. And there's a lot going on there. But I think that social connectivity, in my mind, is on par with sleep and food with regards to overall health. Like if you're really negatively impacted there, it's going to be a major piece of your overall health. And if you tick that box, you can get away with a lot of other stuff.
Mm.
Yeah. So I was listening to a book, Heartbreak. It's amazing. It's this new book out about a woman that got divorced, and she gets really sick, and she's trying to figure out why her health declines, and she's kind of going through all the numbers and trying to seek it out and talking to all these neuroscientists and everything. But loneliness your chance of dying early for loneliness is by far beats out cancer or autoimmune diseases, heart disease. It's loneliness.
Wow. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people make you feel good. Like if you have good friends and you're around them and you're laughing, like how's that not good for you?
Right.
You know, it really should be prescribed.
Right.
Yeah. So exercise is critical, but not the primary factor.
I think it provides the quality of life. And, you know, when we think about longevity and kind of health span versus lifespan, we want to live as well as we can, as long as we can, and then very short, you know, decline and then, you know, fade out. And I think that smart exercise, a base level of cardio, some resistance training, and then just doing a variety of activity, good mobility, that I think that feeds into the ability to do all the stuff that we want to do. And also, like, you get sick, you get injured, you get in a car accident or something, like people, you know, if you're better shape, you're just harder to kill. And I think that is such a major factor. But my opinion, you could, you know, maybe agree, but I think when people tackle exercise as a calorie burning endeavor, like you're much better time spent focusing on good quality food, very protein centric, because it tends to be satiating so you don't overeat.
Yeah.
So you exercise so you have a kick-ass life, but if you want to lose weight, good body composition, it's really the nutrition part that addresses the bulk of that.
So the people that do exercise just for calorie burnout, the problem I usually have with that is that I don't think they enjoy it. I think they think of it as this task that one must do in order to look better or to justify a sundae, you know, justify an ice cream sundae or a bowl of spaghetti, you know? Whereas it's like you should enjoy the results. Like you feel good. Like it's great for the body. It's a stress reliever. It relieves anxiety. It's like it's so critical. If you're going through any like stressful period of your life, that is the time where you got to be like disciplined with your workouts. You got to hit them hard.
Right.
It's a medicine. That's how I feel.
Yeah, and sarcopenia is something, so that's age-related muscle loss, and we know everyone over 40 starts to lose their ability to digest protein, and so your need for protein and your requirement to even just maintain muscle mass goes way up as you get older, and the RDA for protein is like so far below. It's set at the minimum to avoid disease. It's not the optimal amount, but even that RDA is way, way, way too low for protein.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, what is the RDA for protein?
So the RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. But then because Americans don't like kilograms and they don't want to do the calculations, you'll see these numbers floating around. So for women, they'll say women need 45 grams of protein and men need 55 grams of protein or something. But that's based on this ideal body weight of 125 for women and 155 for men.
What do we live in the 30s?
And so, yeah, so the average weight, according to the CDC, for women is 165, and for men it's like 195.
Is that real? The average weight for women is 165?
Mm-hmm. For American women.
Wow.
Yeah, and so then when you go 0.8 grams per kilogram, you're way above what these RDA you're at about double what the RDA is. But then when you look at optimal amounts, so we went through this in the book, and I looked at all the research and how they came up with the RDA, and you know, we really need at least double the RDA of protein, and we need it from animal source foods. There's a huge difference between animal and plant source proteins.
Now, that's something that vegans, their hackles get up immediately.
Mm-hmm.
How much real data is there that shows, like actual real-world data that shows that plant-based protein is not as bioavailable as animal-based protein?
I mean, that's just basic biochemistry. It's just a fact.
And what is it? So if you have like 30 grams of broccoli protein versus 30 grams of beef protein, like what is the difference? What's happening?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know exactly how like broccoli would compare
Probably be
to beef.
A lot of mass for broccoli. If you wanted to get 30 grams of broccoli protein, like how much broccoli would that be? A big ass bowl of broccoli.
Right.
You have your the beans.
I do have it for yeah, in fact,
for
I have
legumes?
Yeah,
So
I have
let's
it.
look at that.
Yeah, I have it. I don't know if the Dropbox link that I sent came through. So I've got one comparing beans to beef, and I have it for protein, for vitamins, and for minerals.
And for farts.
There's really no comparison at that point.
But the other thing is that it's limiting. So here we have.
Okay.
So we don't just need protein; we need amino acids.
Right.
And there's a popular meme out there comparing broccoli to steak and how you can get all your protein just from broccoli.
Right.
But kidney beans are a much better source. So I went with kidney beans. And so 4 ounces of steak versus 4 ounces of kidney beans. And when you see these plant-based memes, they will be comparing uncooked beans, and they will be doing it by calorie, not by portion.
Okay.
Right? So we need to, look at, portion size.
And why are they doing uncooked beans?
Because there's more beans in uncooked beans.
Oh, I see. Because the water's not.
It's like double.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's not realistic in terms of a portion of food because you'd cook them and they swell up and
and the calories that you would need to eat to get. All right. So we have only 9 grams of protein from 4 ounces of kidney beans. So in order to get the same, even close to the amount of total protein, you would need to eat over 3 times the amount of kidney beans.
So, and that would be, somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 and something calories of.
And then you need to have
beans.
rice with it as well to
Right.
balance it out.
Versus 180 calories of protein or 180 calories from 30 grams of protein a steak.
And, on that, like sarcopenia side, like losing muscle mass as we age, and also just for athletics, isoleucine, leucine, some of these branched chain amino acids are the really important amino acids because they stimulate anabolic signaling. And you have a threshold with that. If you don't hit a certain threshold, it doesn't turn on the anabolic signaling, so you're tending to lose muscle mass. There's kind of some bro science, like you need to eat every 2 hours or you're going to lose muscle mass. It's not to that point, but we do need some amount of anabolic signaling. Exercise, specifically strength training, causes that anabolic signaling, and then eating a protein-rich meal that's rich in branched chain amino acids causes that signaling too. And it's not impossible to do via plant-based methods, but it's hard. Like it's really kind of a calculus problem to get that part, that box ticked. Like you need to do protein powders and stuff like that to usually get in there and make that happen. But then you also get a ton of calories comparatively.
Wouldn't the simple solution be to, if you wanted to have a plant-based diet, is to eat the plant-based protein but then substitute with exogenous amino acids?
You could.
If you did that.
And stick more with legumes and try not to get your protein from like quinoa or peanut butter. Like nuts are a really actually horrible way to get protein.
We'll get to that in a second. But when you're making exogenous amino acids, is it possible to do that in a vegan way?
Yeah, I mean,
What are they making them out of?
Just synthetic chemistry. I mean, then it's other chemicals, but
Right.
you could make it in a completely vegan-friendly way. Yeah,
But it's chemicals, but not bad for you.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
chemical's a weird word, right?
Right,
People
right,
panic.
right.
So you could, in fact, get all of your amino acids and have some sort of a plant-based protein.
Yeah.
Like, what is the optimal plant-based protein? Is it pea protein? Is it hemp protein? Like, what's the best one?
I would probably say pea protein would
Pea?
be optimal.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we're meant to eat things in their full form. Mm-hmm. And so if you were to actually eat peas, that's a lot of peas.
Right. And how are they extracting the pea protein?
I mean,
A lot of kitchen chemistry.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to separate out the protein, carbs, fat, and then isolate the proteins. And whether you do a hydrolysate of the proteins, like kind of pre-digest them or leave it together. Usually hydrolysates taste horrible. So, yeah. But I mean, in like an idealized world, if somebody's really, they want to be vegan, but they want to tick the boxes of getting that anabolic signaling, preventing sarcopenia, improving, body composition, that is a way that you could do it. And
So
it would be vegan, and it would give the right amount of protein, not overfeeding you potentially on the calorie side, and that could be a way to kind of thread the needle.
So if someone's like a vegan weightlifter,
Right.
and that's the way they should do it. They should have like pea protein and then substitute with supplement with amino acids.
with especially the branched chain amino acids.
And these are all the ones that you need: cysteine, histidine,
Leucine and isoleucine are the main ones, and then valine. But the leucine is the most anabolic signaling of all of them.
And so if someone wanted to do that, like what would you take? Like what's a good is there a good branch chain amino acids? Does branch chain, when they say branch chain amino acids, does that usually contain all of these that we're seeing on this chart?
Yes, not all of them. It'll be leucine, isoleucine, and valine typically.
And so all those other ones, should you have all those in there? Like how would one supplement with like a fully, like if you look at all the stuff that you're getting from meat, it's crazy.
Yeah.
There's so much more. Like if you wanted to get those benefits, I mean, is that what's going on when someone says that meat is not as bioavailable? Is that part of what's going on? Is that you're just not getting the same benefit from it because it doesn't have the amino acid profile?
Oh, and this isn't even taking into account bioavailability. That's like a whole nother discussion. This is just the label, like the USDA nutrient database numbers, but that doesn't take into account the protein digestibility score.
Let's explain it to people that are just listening. We're looking at this chart, and it shows the sirloin steak on the left and the kidney beans on the right, and the amount of amino acids is in most cases 4 or 5 times more, if not more than that, from the steak than you're getting from the beans. The beans have similar calories, but only 9 grams of protein versus 30 grams of protein for the steak. So this is what we're looking at.
And then I have this broken out also for minerals and for vitamins, just to show the micronutrients that you're getting from animal source foods too, which are far superior to. So here we have vitamins.
Right, but this is just beans, right, which are not really known as primary sources of vitamins.
Oh, they're touted as the magic food.
Beans for vitamins?
For nutrient density,
not for vitamin A, since they have 0%.
But this is kind of the cul-de-sac you get stuck into, though. Like, how do you get enough protein?
Right.
How do you not overeat? And then what type of nutrient deficiencies are you facing at the end of that? Like it's.
Well, if you look, it's funny that they put vitamin D because you really don't get vitamin D from food. On both of them have 0%. Like, why is that on there then?
It's just part of the USDA.
Right. Oh, I see. And vitamin A, again, it's like you only get 1% from steak. But the big ones are vitamin B12. That's a big one because if you look at the big difference in B12 in kidney beans, you have 0%. B12 in steak, you have 95% of your USDA, and that's just for 4 ounces. This is a small portion of sirloin steak, and you're getting almost a full daily requirement of vitamin B12, which that is a big factor with people that are on a plant-based diet is getting their B12.
Yeah, and iron and B12 are 2 of the most common nutrient deficiencies worldwide.
And both of those are common in meat and not very common in plant-based stuff.
Yeah, and whenever there is a nutrient in both plants and animals, our bodies prefer the animal source nutrient.
Why is that, and how do we know that?
So for example, beta carotene, which is like what makes sweet potatoes orange and carrots orange, we have to convert that to vitamin A. Retinol, which is the usable form. So when we eat an animal source of vitamin A, which is in fats of animals, we're getting it directly. And there's about 45% of the population has a gene that makes it so they can't make that conversion efficiently. So not only do we have to convert it, but then almost half of all humans can't do it very well.
Really?
And so to convert beta carotene to vitamin A, and that's just one, heme iron in animals.
Half of the people that can't, is it because of the location of their ancestors? Is it?
That's my guess, because what we see with omega-3s is people that, lived along the coast where they were getting their omega-3s from fish, lack the ability to efficiently convert plant source essential fatty acids to the ones that we actually need for our bodies to use.
Very interesting. And so how would one know? How would one find out if maybe some people could digest sweet potatoes really easily, some people can't? How would one know?
Some genetic testing can ferret some of that out, but now that we have people that come from so many different backgrounds, it can be challenging, and the genetic testing isn't perfect on that. You can find that maybe you have a high likelihood of converting the carotenoids into retinol, but then some of these nutrient issues are gut related. So if your gut microbiome is deficient in some type of bacteria, you may not even get the conversion to be able to get the beta carotene into your body. So that's another layer to it. And it just gets really complex. Like I think you almost go the simpler way of, instead of trying to get in and get super detailed on like the genetics, how do you look, how do you feel, how do you perform, keep kind of an inventory of what you're eating. And then if there are some pretty classic nutrient deficiency syndromes, like dry skin and split nails and things like that for zinc deficiency as an example. And so it's almost easier to go that way versus trying to get in and then from like first principles figure out what's your genetics and what's the perfect diet that's going to work for you. Yeah.
So the bioavailability, what do we know in terms of the bioavailability of the plant-based proteins versus animal-based proteins? Like, how do we know that the body is absorbing the protein more efficiently from an animal source?
I'm trying to pull up the protein bioavailability chart, because there is a chart that sets it, and it's animal source proteins are always above plant source proteins. 100%.
Mechanistically, what they do is they'll figure out a given amount of protein, and then they've fed that to people, and then they will look at serum amino acid levels after that, kind of track them over time. So animal-based proteins, you're going to, let's say you give them 30 grams of protein, and then you track over a 2-hour period the branch, all the amino acids that we see go up and then down during that. And you can compare that to beans or broccoli. And so that is a piece of how you figure out the comparative bioavailability of one protein versus another. And you see this even just with like cooked proteins versus non-cooked proteins. Like I know that there's kind of, I like eating some like steak tartare here and there and stuff like that, but there's just kind of a reality that meat that is cooked is much more bioavailable for the proteins and also the nutrients that are in it versus raw meat.
That's interesting. Like, what about rare?
I'm not sure on that because it's still cooked some. So
it's
I'm
cooked
not,
on the outside.
Yeah, it's cooked on
but
the outside.
The inside's pretty.
Yeah, I suspect that you like if you were to sous vide something and slow cook it, and it's cooked thoroughly, I think that that would probably optimize like the bioavailability of the whole protein. Yeah.
What about the difference between like a medium rare and a well done? Is well done less bioavailable or more?
I think that well done is probably more bioavailable, but it tastes so bad that I've thought about that. It's a really good question. I don't know for sure, but if you only eat a tiny piece of it because it tastes horrible, then I don't know if it's really helping you.
Because I'm always wondered, like particularly because of game meat, because wild game meat has always been touted as being much more protein rich than domestic cattle, and I eat a lot of that stuff. So I'm always wondering, like, what is going on? How do they know?
It's definitely lean. So I mean, you're getting a lot of protein per serving because the game meat is so incredibly lean.
Right.
So when you compare it per calorie, or even if you've just got 4 or 5 ounces on a scale, if you have like a ribeye, what is a ribeye? Like 20% fat by weight?
I think it's more like 45%.
It's 45 by calories, or is it 45% by weight?
Well, so there's no carbs in meat. So all you have is protein and fat. So if you're looking for like what has more protein, like a boneless, skinless chicken breast can have more protein than a burger, only because it has less fat.
But it also has less nutrients overall because a lot of the fat soluble vitamins, the E, A, not really D, K, is all in the fat. So that's one of the benefits of eating at least some amount of animal fat, because those fat soluble vitamins kind of associate with that.
What about the difference between a red meat and a white meat, like a chicken versus like a grass fed steak?
Beef is about 30% more nutrient dense than chicken
Per calorie.
And chicken is really high in omega-6s. Like really high.
Is that
good? The inflammatory fats. So, we're a lot of people think chicken is more virtuous to eat for some reason, but
virtuous? Is that?
Yeah, you'll see like everyone who has these like clean eating books that are eliminating meat, but they'll still have boneless, skinless chicken breast in there, of course. Because it's more like almost more like tofu of meat. It's not on a bone. like white and, kind of clean looking.
Plus, chickens they're little heartless dinosaurs.
Yeah.
People don't really. Cows you could pet them and stuff. Chickens just trying to figure out if they can eat you.
And they will if they could.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
I used to have chickens, and they pecked at my daughter's feet. And my wife was like, she thinks that the hen thinks our daughter's foot was a mouse or a worm or something. I go, no, she's trying to eat our daughter. Like, what are you talking? She's just dumb. This is a dumb little marble-brained fuckhead who's trying to eat our kid. like that's how I thought about that chicken. I'm like, fuck off, you little cunt. It's like shitty birds.
So I always tell people, like, if you're in a grocery store and you don't have access to, know your farmer, grass-fed beef, and you're just looking at pork, chicken, or beef, from a nutrient density, from an animal welfare, and from an environmental perspective, actually beef is going to be the better choice when you're looking at the industrial food system model.
Okay. So this is where we get into the weeds, right? Because when you say that in any way that beef or raising beef is good for the environment in any way, shape, or form, that's when people go nonsense. The doctrine, as stated up on high, is that if we want to save the environment, we have to eat less meat.
Yeah,
I hear this from people with no evidence. I hear it from people and they spout it out and I go, what are you saying? Well, you should know already. They'll give you that. You should know already that if you're eating a lot of meat, it's bad for the environment. I'm like, how's it bad? Tell me how it's bad. What's going on? And they'll bring up factory farming. I'm like, well, factory farming is horrible. It's horrible. Everybody says it's disgusting. But what about regenerative farming? And they're like, well, that's not sustainable. That doesn't work.
Well,
or we don't have the land for it.
Right.
And this is where sometimes I think that we chose to do the book and film because we wanted to commit career suicide and public self-immolation both at the same time. Because it's like this thing ended up pissing everybody off because we're not totally in the like whitewashed regenerative ag camp. Like we see some laudable features to pieces of like the industrial system. And some of the meat that we brought you is from a local outfit that mainly pasture feeds their meat. But when they were in a drought situation, and so they reached out to some of the local breweries and they got a bunch of residue from the brewing process, and that's what they supplemented their animals with.
Which is some kind of barley grain.
Yeah, and that's a whole other interesting thing is the bulk of the food that is given to cattle comes out of the ethanol industry. We're not stealing food from humans to do that. With chickens and pork, you kind of are allocating food that could have otherwise gone to humans. But even conventional beef spends 70% of its life on grass. And then that finishing process, oftentimes part of the finishing process, they put it in a wheat field where the wheat's been harvested, and then it eats the crop residues, and it's eating the mash from industrial or drinkable ethanol production. So there's a whole interesting nutrient upcycling story there that just gets buried, and it's really important and it's really valuable. It's very efficient, but it doesn't really fit into either camp. It isn't this beatific view that we would like all these grass-fed, pasture-raised stories to fit into, and it's definitely not the horrors of like industrial chicken production, which is super gnarly.
Yeah, super gnarly. What is drinkable ethanol?
Beer, wine, just the stuff because you have industrial ethanol, and then you have the stuff but a lot for beer, wine, spirits, all that type of stuff.
Even Oatly, they got into trouble from some of their followers because the hulls from the oats were going to feed pigs. And
what is Oatly?
Oatly is a oat milk company.
Oh, okay.
And
I hate when they say that.
Yeah.
Oat milk. Like
oat water.
Does not come out of an oat breast. Stop it. You stop it with the milk. That's not milk. That's just you're doing weird shit with water.
Right.
It's not milk.
It's oat tea.
Yeah. That's
really.
Good, call it white oat tea.
Yeah.
Or almond tea.
But there's a lot of leftovers from their processing.
Mm-hmm.
So they were feeding pigs with it, which is an awesome use of that.
Right.
But the vegans found out and put the kibosh on it, and now they're trying to form oat bars for humans out of this inedible fiber that exactly.
Oh, Jesus.
And so, but with cattle, because they're ruminants, their digestive system is very different than a pig or a chicken. And a cow can upcycle stuff that has no other use in our food system, is just going to sit in a pile and emit greenhouse gases anyway if we don't feed it to cows. And so they can actually eat stuff we can't eat and turn it into beef.
Interesting.
So
that's the grain that's left over, the mash that's left over from the breweries, and that's this oat stuff. And so the vegans got upset, and they're upset because they were bringing it to people that were giving this stuff to pigs that were going to be led to slaughter.
Correct.
Well, is there a way to it seems like it's silly to just not use it. I mean, the earth uses it, right? If it does biodegrade, it's going to compost and it's going to have some sort of a function for...
It does, but when you're dealing with industrial levels of that, like in Brazil, there's a problem with the banana peels, because the banana peels are actually pretty toxic, and it's hard to figure out how to deal with those things.
How are banana peels toxic when I watch so many people on TikTok make shredded pork out of banana peels?
If they really get after it, they're going to have a rough day. They're going to shit themselves.
Have you ever seen that?
Yeah,
I've seen
them
do that.
Yeah.
So that's not edible, right? Like, what are they doing? They're basically like spicing up garbage and trying to serve it as pulled pork.
Yeah.
That is so weird when they do that. The Sean Baker videos where he's sitting there, if you haven't seen
And
it,
he's just
Sean Baker
horrified.
has a giant cutting board and literally like a machete.
Yeah.
And he's just slicing into beef, and he's eating this like 4-pound ribeye. And while he's cutting into beef, on the other side of the screen, you see someone making like tofu ribs.
Yeah.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
Look at him.
It's some of the best performance art on the internet.
But look at the size of that fucking knife.
I do love the size of that knife.
The knife is so preposterous.
Oh,
He's
and
just
here's the
taking
banana peel. Yep.
big slices of meat. And so they're taking this banana peel and they scrape off the stuff on the inside. Oh, so he's eating pork too. And so he's eating real pork while they're eating this
Fake
stuff.
pork.
Well, it's like what is in a banana peel? I mean, what is it? Just plant fiber? Is there any nutrients at all?
I mean, technically there would be some nutrients, but what it has is the anti-predation chemicals to keep things from eating the banana. So it has these, I don't know if it's saponins, and I think it's saponins. It's kind of a soap-like substance, but it will really irritate and damage the gut lining. Like they try to feed it to cattle, and even cattle that are really good at eating kind of squirrely things, it will make the cattle sick.
So that's just the outside, though. Why doesn't the inside have those things?
Even that stuff that she's scraping out has some of that in it, too.
But the banana itself doesn't?
The banana does not.
That's why
Interesting.
fruit is doing well for you right now.
Yeah.
So fruit wants you to eat it because it wants you to deposit the seeds somewhere else.
Right. It wants you to poo it out, and so the seeds will be fertilized, and then they'll grow somewhere else. That's its whole strategy.
That's its plan.
Yeah.
That's the thought process behind the way Paul Saladino describes his, he calls himself Carnivore MD, and basically he's got a meat-based diet, but he supplements it with fruit. And this is the first time I've ever tried to do it that way, and it's so much easier to do than just eat meat.
Yeah.
And it's great because before workouts, like today I had 2 bananas, and then I worked out. Like, you've no problem exercising. Whereas when I was just eating meat, I was a little draggy, like when I was working out.
And I love meat, but the only time of my life, like I've eaten kind of a ketogenic diet for 23 years, but there's a little bit of fruit, some vegetables, some different things in there. And the only time that I had like neurotic food desires was when I was doing like strict carnivore, and I wanted pizza and ice cream and shit that I never wanted before.
Right.
Like I went kind of crazy, whereas like loosening it up and having a little bit of fruit, a little bit of honey here and there, particularly before, pre or post workout or something, like I'm fine with that.
Do you think that's what is that process of converting the meat to sugar, gluconeogenesis? Do you think that's what that is? It's like your body's like cranking
It's an
it up.
expensive process. It's a hard process to do.
Yeah.
Could be that. Could have been I was just nuts.
Rob and I are already really restricted with our diet.
We both have celiac.
Yeah, so like,
What is celiac? You can't have any wheat. You can't have any. What is the bulk of the restrictions?
yeah, I mean, everything on the inside of the grocery store is just completely, or even going to a taco place, and if they fried the corn tortilla on the same griddle as the flour one, I would have a reaction.
Celiac is an autoimmune gluten sensitivity. So the villi, the little finger-like things that line the gut that help absorb nutrients, those just get killed via an autoimmune reaction because the body is it's made antibodies against proteins in our body by mistakenly making them against the gluten gliadin proteins.
And how many people have this and don't know about it?
I know that they think it's 1 in 133 people have it.
Wow.
It took me until I was 26 to find out that I had it. I had it my whole life.
And you were just eating pizza and going off?
And being very sick. Yeah.
Interesting. So, so there's the celiac thing, and this requires you to stay away from all glutens. Is there anything else that it requires you to stay away from? Are you allowed? Are nuts okay, like peanuts, walnuts?
I mean, I definitely feel better when I eat a diet more close to what you described. But yeah, strictly meat was a little intense for me. Although, I wanted to mention I had a nutrition client who with compulsive overeating. And I've sat through these, they're like AA meetings, but for people that are compulsive overeaters. So like their reward signals just light up times a million in their brain when they encounter certain foods.
Really? What is that?
I mean, I think some people just are prone to addiction.
Is it a psychological thing, or is there a thing you could track in the brain when they're overeating like this?
I mean, my theory on this is that some people are just low dopamine and they may get into heroin, they may get into gambling, or they may become compulsive overeaters, and it's just sort of how it plays out.
Or like some of my clients, they do all of the above.
Or all of them. Yeah. But so I sat in on a meeting when I was a dietetic student, and they all have to identify their trigger food and then agree to not eat it and abstain from it. So sort of like an alcoholic type meeting, except for, unfortunately for them, you have to eat. You can't avoid eating, and it was white foods that was unanimously the trigger food for like all these people. But it still can be overwhelming to figure out what you're going to eat. And so anyway, I had a young woman who she just wanted to go carnivore. It was just easier for her to like just give herself only that, and she lost. And she had rheumatoid arthritis that went into remission.
She lost?
Like 60. It's still going, actually. I think the last time I checked was 60 or 75 pounds.
And her arthritis went into remission?
Yes.
So what do we think is happening to people's guts? Do you think that it's the plant defense chemicals that are messing with people's guts? Do you think when it comes to, obviously not celiacs, which is an extreme version, but when people do have issues with autoimmune issues that are food related, what is causing this stuff?
I think there's a lot. Like we have now, antibiotics were developed in the 1930s, like the sulfa-based antibiotics, and it was 1950s-ish that the more penicillin-derived antibiotics started hitting. So how many generations now do we have, like mom to baby, like alterations potentially in the gut microbiome? So some people who have the celiac gene don't express celiac disease because they have gut microbes that trim up the prolyl endopeptidase. They have prolyl endopeptidase bacteria that break up the gluten proteins.
Is that something someone can supplement with?
Kind of, but it doesn't work that well. Like it's kind of like it will protect you from like cross-contamination a little bit, but like you get so sick with celiac, it's something that I would be careful, playing around with that. But so you've got antibiotics, you have alterations in just our environment. I think that there's gut issues, mitochondrial issues, and then changes in our food supply. So I think it's a lot of different things. Low vitamin D levels, like the autoimmune diseases track very, very closely with latitude. You tend to see relatively little autoimmune disease near the equator, and then you see it much higher at higher latitudes. So vitamin D is a big factor. So there's a lot of different things that go into it, which is a little bit of the problem of trying to figure out how to fix it, because doctors have a tendency to just say that people are crazy or it's mainly in their head because there's like this piece and that piece and the other piece. There's clearly a piece to a loss of gut barrier function. Like that's pretty well understood. Alessio Fasano, like he's a researcher mainly looking at celiac disease, but he has celiac disease as a model for autoimmune disease in general. But there's a loss of intestinal barrier function. When intact food particles can make it into the body, then the body can mount immune responses to everything. And then the flip side of this, and maybe why carnivore works so well, is that if somebody eats a very simple diet, it doesn't irritate the gut can heal, and then the body is not primed to be, reacting as much, doesn't mount the same immune response, and so you can kind of dial that inflammatory process down.
There's also other people that think that when you live in a really clean environment,
the hygiene hypothesis,
so all of us have immune systems that want to be working and exercising themselves all the time, and in places where you're more likely to have parasites or other pathogens through your food, your immune system's busy working on all that stuff. And keeping you healthy. But when you are living in a place where there's just not anything for your immune system to work on, then it'll work on you and start attacking yourself.
How much do you buy into this idea that plants, whether it's like kale or what have you, these plant defense chemicals that these plants emit are causing some autoimmune issues with people?
For sure. They are in some people. It shouldn't really be that way, though, not to the degree that we see now. And this is where, just looking back at like the 1950s, people weren't – celiac existed then, but it didn't exist to the degree it does now. You didn't see these multiple chemical sensitivities that folks have now. Plant defense mechanisms are definitely there. I mean, part of the reason why people soak, sprout, and ferment grains and legumes is that it decreases those things. So within most traditional food cultures, there's ways of taking relatively toxic foods and making them less toxic. Like what do they do with the taro root to get the cyanide out of it? I mean, just cooking, but they will also
that's a big
ferment
process.
it. Yeah.
But even with corn and lime.
Yeah, corn and lime, isn't it? So there's a lot of historical food systems that help deal with this stuff. But it just, when you look at most traditional food systems, it took pretty good care of people. Like not everybody on the planet need to eat paleo to have really outstanding health. Traditional Mesoamerican food, even though it was very corn rich, they figured out that you needed to do some things to prevent pellagra, which is this B vitamin deficiency ultimately, which was the inclusion of lime. But there's something that's changed where
the inclusion of lime. What do you mean?
When you make corn tortillas traditionally, you like ferment it with lime, and that breaks down some of the anti-nutrients with the corn. It makes it more digestible.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So this is when they're making the tortilla itself.
Right.
So what about the difference between a cooked vegetable versus a raw vegetable? Because one of the things that people love to say is like, oh, I only eat raw vegetables. And I'm like, hey, man, I don't think that's good. I used to think that was good, but I don't think that's good anymore.
You're right. Period. Yeah. I mean, it's just really hard to digest them. And I mean, when you look back at traditional cultures, pre-agriculture, meat was what you ate when you could get that, and then all the other stuff was what you ate when you couldn't get the meat.
You just ate it to survive.
Right.
Just to give you some calories.
Right.
Yeah.
But meat is the most nutrient-dense, perfect food for humans. It just is.
It's such an exhausting conversation when you say that to people, though. Like you said, I think, you eating all that meat, like what about your cholesterol? What about you going to have a heart attack?
Yeah, and it's working its way into policy, which is really disturbing to me, like as a mother. Like New York City public schools, vegan on Fridays now, in addition to meatless Mondays. So now you've got a school system where 70% of the kids are economically disadvantaged and might go home on the weekends. Like they need school lunch, right? And now you're flanking the weekends with nutrient poor both Friday and Monday.
And it's this ideologically driven thing that's based on this idea that if you eat less meat, it's better for the environment, like this thing that they say. And they also say for health purposes, like, they'll cite the China study. Like, it's one fucking study, and like, no matter how much you say, like, hey, you need to read the rebuttals of the China study because they're pretty brutal, and it shows that it's a lot of biased evidence and that they really didn't do a good job of being objective about that.
So there's one thing that's coming up, that's happening right now, that's really interesting. So there's this thing called the global burden of disease, And this is published by The Lancet, and it's what most global food policy is set on. And between their report in 2017 and 2019, meat was 36 times more likely to kill you. And there were some researchers, some friends of mine that pushed back. They wrote a letter to The Lancet, which was blocked. The Lancet, it sounds like, is finally going to be publishing it like over the next couple days.
Finally publishing this thing that says that meat is 36 more times.
Oh no, that's out. The
That's
2019 Global Burden of Disease is out, and I actually had a graphic on that just to show.
What are you saying is going to be published?
So some friends of mine,
rebuttal?
right? Because these guys didn't provide any evidence at all as to why meat. So there's this theoretical minimum risk exposure level that is supposed to be the safe level of meat you can eat. And it went down to 0, according to these researchers, which is going to be global food policy. You can now eat 0 red meat safely, with no. So that they said they did their own systematic review, but they didn't show any of the evidence, any of the papers they reviewed, and there's no research that's strong that's showing. Meat is there's only one randomized control trial.
If they're not showing you any evidence, they're not showing any papers. How is this science?
Right. And so finally the Lancet is going to publish this paper where my colleagues are questioning the results and where is the science. And the Lancet, the global burden of disease is the Lancet. So this is a really very big deal.
So I don't understand. Like, what is there? I always thought that with scientific papers, you had to cite sources and you had to. So
up until about 2 years ago, that was pretty consistent. And then I think we've seen a loosening of standards.
Yeah. Here's the difference between 2017 and 2019. So you can see the top part is what we're doing in excess. And you can see that diets high in red meat used to be a very small percentage of like the cause of death globally, which is even a silly thing. But it used to be sodium was much higher. And now meat has gone up. Do you see this? 36 times more likely to be the cause of death.
How is that?
In 2 years.
So this is the study. This is and this analysis when they're doing this. How are they coming to this conclusion?
Right.
Nobody knows.
They
Nobody
just
knows.
tell you.
They're
just saying it.
They're just saying it.
So what is their motivation?
We don't really know.
A little tinfoil hatty. I think that there's a powerful desire to consolidate food production globally, and this is an amazing way to do it. It's as it is. There's I think that 6 or 7 companies produce like 90% of the food that's consumed globally, but what we've seen over time is just more consolidation, and there's this kind of weird interface between tech and venture capital and food. There have been some interesting pieces where folks are looking at food like they want it to be operated like IP, like software. They want you to be able to own the
It's
intellectual
interesting you
property
say that
around
because
it.
Bill Gates is now the largest owner of farmland in the United States.
Yeah.
We looked at that up once. There was some sort of dispute about that, but then we looked at it, said he was.
He wants
right?
to be.
He owns a lot.
He
Put it that
owns
way.
a shitload.
The Gates Foundation is one of the major sponsors of this study that I was just talking
so
about.
it's fuckery. But the thing is, like, he keeps saying that we've got to eat less meat, and we've got to cut our consumption of meat out to be healthy, and then we're going to get used to these meat alternatives. When a guy like that says that, I'm like, are you making money because of this? Like, why are you saying that? And by the way, you look like shit. Like, because if you're eating those plant-based burgers or whatever the fuck you're doing, like, you're obese. Like, a guy like that telling people about he's got these breasts
Moobs.
and this gut, and I'm like, this is crazy. You're one of the richest guys on earth. You have access to the best nutrients, the best. You could have an amazing trainer. You could be in phenomenal shape, and you're giving out public health advice. You're giving out health advice, and you're sick. It's like literally like a non-athlete trying to coach professionals. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? How are you giving any health advice when you look like that? Your health is piss poor. I'm not a doctor. But when you've got man boobs and a gut and you're walking around, you have these like toothpick arms, I'm like, hey, buddy, you're not healthy.
There's a lot of profit to be made in processing something into a Beyond Burger. There's a lot of profit to be made.
But those aren't even selling anymore. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, we're kind of lucky in a way. Like the consumers kind of got in and poked around that, and there was Forbes did an interesting piece where there was so much interest from the vegan community around Impossible Burger and Impossible Foods, and this Forbes piece was interesting. It made the case that these people are usually very progressive and very anti-corporation, were like the biggest fans or promoters of this corporatization of our food system, which is kind of where all the stuff is going.
They're getting duped.
They really are, but on the one side, there's this story that meat will cause cancer and diabetes and all this stuff, and it's going to destroy the planet because of carbon emissions, and it's using all the water and the land, and it's a slick story. It's an elevator pitch. It's elegant. It's like buttoned up, airtight. And then when we start trying to unpack that, you have to dig into ecology and non-equilibrium thermodynamics, and it's not an elevator pitch, and it's a lot of work to unpack what those claims are. And then, even what is the motivation to do this? Then we start getting into conspiracy theory land. It's like, well, there are people that want to control the food system, and they want to turn food into intellectual property that they own. But that really seems to be what's going on with this.
And I think they've realized consumers aren't going to just buy it in the grocery store. And by the way, it's twice as expensive. Like Beyond Burger is twice as expensive as organic grass-fed beef per pound.
Wow.
But they sell it in half-pound packages right next to the pound packages, and so
they trick you.
But so why not just make it policy and indoctrinate these kids from kindergarten to age 12 with these messages? Like the Meatless Monday messages are all wrong. Like they're all wrong.
Message?
Meat is bad for your health and the environment, and they use these beautiful, simplistic infographics showing livestock takes up 3/4 of the land. But it's not talking about the types of land, or that your burger used 10 bathtubs full of water. But then we're not talking about, the most of the water footprint for a cow is actually in the grass. It's called green water. It's like water that's already in the environment, in rain. Whether the cow is there or not, it's going to happen.
Do we have that infographic?
Yeah,
Like,
I have the water.
If you
one.
want to talk about how much water a burger uses up, you better not be eating almonds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You better not be eating. You better shut your mouth if you're eating almonds.
Right.
Yeah.
Those things are ridiculous.
So here's the water one, and I've broken it down: land use, feed use, but this is just the water one. And so what most people don't get is that there's green water is natural rain, and then the blue water is like when you look down on a map and see rivers and lakes.
So what we're looking at, folks that are just listening, is when you look at typical beef versus grass-finished beef, it looks like there's probably like, how many dots are on these
A little
things?
different. So we're at the bottom. I have the percentages. So it's 94% green water for typical beef and 97% green water for average. And this is average. Like in Vermont, it might be different than Nevada, but
So they have it broken down to these droplets, and these droplets, there's 100 droplets on each side, and 2 droplets from the grass-finished beef are lake streams and underground water. 3 droplets from the typical beef. So, and that's what everybody's concerned about. What people are really concerned about, the draining of the lakes and streams and the underground.
so it's not
water.
drinking water.
Right. And the rest of it, the entire graph, is natural rain, which is rain that exists, moisture that exists in vegetable matter.
Yeah, and I mean,
Plant
it's going
matter.
to fall on this land, which is land that has been grasslands for eons, and we can't use it for anything else. When people say we use all this land for cattle, that's, bison are a good example. I'm good friends with the folks that own a roam-free bison ranch in Montana. They do both cattle and bison because the cattle don't go up these super steep mountains. And so, there are these grassland mountains that the bison graze. And if they don't graze it, then the whole ecosystem just collapses. The the ecosystem has been this plant-animal interaction for millions of years.
And this plant-animal interaction is based on the animals' manure,
Yep.
fertilizes the plants, the animals eat the plants.
Dung beetles, insects, birds,
Yeah.
all this stuff. So it's not stealing land from anything. This is what grasslands do. It's not stealing water from anything. This is the rain, sleet, and snow that falls on the grasslands. And these animals should be there because it's part of a healthy ecosystem. Like the Audubon Society in the last 10 years has been getting really involved in regenerative ag because one of the first things that they see when people start doing pasture-based meat is that the bird species come back in remarkable profusion because it starts fixing, if you fix all of the ecosystem issues, then these literal canary in the coal mines end up getting addressed and we see more bird species come back.
Well, this brings us to this whole idea of regenerative agriculture being scalable.
Yeah.
And is it?
So first of all, 85% of the beef cattle in the U.S. right now are grazing on land we can't crop. So these
85%.
Yeah. So because cattle only spend about the last 3 or so months of their lives on feedlots, and so really good grazing can happen even if they do end up being finished on grain.
So most cattle are not
all
cattle. So they don't just eat grain from the moment they're babies.
No.
They eat grass, and then when they're getting ready to slaughter them, then for how many months they eat grain?
3 to 4, usually about 3.
And then they basically get sick.
It depends
like
on the
fat.
system. I mean, it like this beef that I brought you today. They're still out on pasture. They're getting some grain. I mean, there's like kind of middle ground. It's not like all good or all bad, in an area where if he were just to let his cattle graze, the cattle wouldn't have enough grass because you guys didn't get any rain in Austin, and so the cows would get sick. So they had
to do something to supplement what you're saying.
Yeah, and we're going to have a brewery process. If we're going to do ethanol, what are we going to do with all that stuff? We can feed it to cattle too.
Right, but when we're talking about scalable, when something's scalable, and I guess we kind of glossed over the Beyond Meat thing. We probably should go back to that. But
Yeah.
Is it scalable in terms of the entire population? What if everybody abandoned veganism?
Right.
If everybody's like, hey, I'm sick, I'm tired of this is not working for me. I'm going to go to some sort of sustainable agriculture way of living.
Yep.
Is that without any factory farming? Is that possible for the entire country?
Well, one thing I want to bring up is that Diana went to Southeast Asia can we talk about the Merck deal and all that?
Yeah.
Like antibiotics, I just want to throw that one out there because there's pieces of this system that cannot go on. So we use a
Cannot go on.
Yeah. So we use a huge amount of antibiotics in chicken and pork production because of the proximity that they you can't do industrial chicken without the antibiotic inputs that we have because they're just on top of each other. Merck and some of these pharmaceutical companies recognize this. And so historically, before the 1940s, chicken and pork were a background part of the food system. Pork was fed largely food scraps. Chickens were just kind of a background part of farms. It wasn't a main feature. I think it was Herbert Hoover that said something like a chicken in every pot is like a campaign deal. This was the beginning of the industrialized food system.
Chickens were expensive.
Chickens were expensive. Yeah, it was usually beef and lamb and things like that were the mainstay. But we know for certain that the current industrial food system is broken at the grain production level because of the damage it does to the topsoil. And it's broken at the animal production level because of the damage that it does to our antibiotic defense, basically. If we lose the ability to use antibiotics because of creating antibiotic-resistant bacteria, we're all screwed. And so Merck is starting to educate folks that produce beef or pork and chicken that we have to figure out sustainable ways of doing this. And it looks a lot more like Joel Salatin or White Oak Farms where you're integrating all this stuff. So when people just immediately say, well, does regenerative ag scale? We definitely need to address that. But the current system has an expiration date on it. We have to find something else. And in the book and the film, we don't lay out specifically. We're not trying to be futurists saying this is the way that this is going to work. But a lot of what we suggest is that food production should be done at a regional level based off the resources and like the knowledge and the culture of the people that are there. Like what happens in Nebraska should be really different than what's happening in like Venezuela or something like that. Like you have different resources, different infrastructure, different cultural values, but there should be an integration of plants and animals. And the whole thing should probably look a lot more like an early 19th century farm with like good technology inputs than just industrial row crops is kind of the ultimate thing that I think we take away from it.
It does sound like he's dodging. So I did go through the numbers in the book.
Okay.
And it does look like we have the land in the U.S. right now to grass finish in a regenerative way all of our beef herd.
Before we go on to that, and I do want to talk about that, like what is causing the need for antibiotics specifically? Is it the factory setting where everyone's jammed in together?
Yep.
That's what it is?
Yeah.
When did that start happening?
1940s. When we had the Haber-Bosch process, which made industrial ammonia for firearms and munitions. And then when we got done with that, we're like, oh, this stuff makes amazing fertilizer. And it really is amazing, but it also damages the topsoil. But it produces huge amounts of food, like in grains.
It makes great fertilizer, but it destroys the topsoil at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it makes great fertilizer in that you can short term, and by short term, I mean like maybe a century and a half, you can produce a shitload of food. But when we think about our planet, we want our topsoil to last forever. Like we want to come back 5,000 years from now and have this topsoil better than what it is today. So there's trade-offs. Like in the short term, it's good from a productivity standpoint, and we started getting excess food production in a way that we could industrialize things like pork and chicken production by the inputs of grains and whatnot.
And then in the 70s is when it really ramped up with chicken. And that's when people started getting like super affordable chicken because there was also, I believe it was vitamin D, they realized was a nutrient that these chickens really needed in order to thrive in a factory setting. And then as soon as they figured that out, plus the antibiotics, which not only keeps them healthier, but actually disrupts their biome enough to make them gain weight.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So those were sort of another couple of magical things. And then in relation to the fertilizer, I just want to mention with the war happening or potential war, we're also running out of fertilizer. So we have to start using animals for nutrients because there's just not enough. You have to mine potash, and that's already a limited thing too, in addition to nitrogen.
So you mean fertilizer just for monocrop agriculture?
Yeah.
Just for growing corn and soy and all that other stuff that we grow in massive quantities.
So a lot of the concerns that folks have, like damage to waterways from effluent from like, CAFO beef production and chicken and all that, it's terrible. But it's also something that if we did more decentralized production, we broke this stuff up and we had cattle integrated with pork, integrated with chickens, and the effluent, their byproducts, the feces, the urine, reintegrate that into the soil. Historically, that's what we did before the industrialization of the food system. This is what people still do in most of the developing world, is they have plant-animal interactions bringing this stuff together. There's certain economies of scale that are really cool with the current system, but it's not like a Ponzi scheme, but I mean, it's got an expiration date on it. Like we are breaking elements of our ecological system by kind of strip mining the ability to produce lots and lots of food right now.
Yeah, that's one thing that I always try to say to people that are very plant-based centric thinking. I just stress on them how unhealthy for the world monocrop agriculture is. Like this completely unnatural. Like you can grow food, you can grow meat in a very natural way, like the polyface farms model, Joel Salatin's model. But if you want to feed the whole world with corn and grain, you've got to have these massive fields. And you're not going to grow anything else but this one thing in these massive fields. And whenever you do that, you are damaging that ground.
And that's what goes into lab meat and all Beyond Burger and Impossible Foods. They're not using organic products. They're using 100% legit chemical ag to make their products.
Well, not only this, it's like one of the most processed things you could ever eat. So all these people that want to eat healthy, plant-based, like if you want to eat like a healthy vegetarian diet, you certainly can. But if you want to eat a healthy vegetarian diet and also pretend that these processed things that are filled with seed oils and like what exactly is in a fake meat burger? How bad are those things for you?
So, I mean, just on a nutrient density level, I've never seen a full breakdown. Like they'll say total protein, total fat, and it'll line up kind of, but like the fat's coming from soybean oil, not natural. The protein is limiting in the amino acids, but we still have yet to see a full nutrient breakdown of all the junk they put in. And of course, it's better to eat real meat.
What's the main ingredients of those burgers?
Pea protein is one of them, and
I think
then
soy ends up like on the oil front, and then also just some of the protein also. Yeah.
What if they mixed those burgers in with a branched chain amino acid profile?
I mean,
Could you do that? Like have a bodybuilding Beyond Burger?
you could.
You could.
You'd make a lot of money.
You'd make a lot of you'd make a lot of money.
Yeah. But are you causing inflammation? Are you giving people issues with these seed oils, like soybean oil? That's not necessarily good for you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And you're still like for every calorie that you consume of that, you're not consuming something else. So where are you getting the vitamins, the minerals, these other things? And in a developed world, you could go to your corner store and get vitamins and do all that. But what's kind of squirrely is that because this whole story has been so tied into climate change, they're really pushing that the developing world adopt this stuff too. And this is one interesting area that different places in the developed world have pushed back because they're like, we can't be dependent on this. Like we have these traditional food systems, and if you make us dependent on the exports of like your industrial row crop food system, we're super dependent, and two, we can't afford it. And then the third point, which Diana really detailed this well in the book, these folks don't have access to like a CVS to go get their B vitamins and their folate and their zinc and their iron and everything. And the same deficiencies that underlie a vegan diet looks shockingly similar to what people face when they're in a malnourished state in a developing country, because they eat a very starch-centric, monocrop type of diet. That is typically the main deficiencies in there largely arise from a lack of animal foods.
So when people talk about the difference between seed oils and there's other vegetable oils that are not bad for you, right? Like olive oil is not bad for you. Avocado oil is not bad for you. Why are some corn-based oils and seed-based oils, why are they bad for you?
Just the ultra processing and the ratio of omegas in them, and they're polyunsaturated. They're not really supposed to be heated, and so they're very unstable, create free radicals.
So if you use them as salad dressing, are they okay?
I mean, but they've already gone through the high heat process and are rancid, and they just kind of add deodorizers so that you can't smell or taste the rancidity.
Really?
Yes, and then they also add coloring to make it look like a butter color. Like you notice all the oils, that's not a natural color for canola oil to be.
Is it white? Like a clear, rather?
Oh, there's an interesting video out there on the Great Canola, and it shows the process of making canola oil.
Go to that, Jamie.
You got
He's
that?
Got it. The Great Con Oil.
Canola.
So canola oil is
Rapeseed oil that was invented in the 40s to be an industrial lubricant.
Yeah, just the name alone is problematic. So these seed oils, they're all rancid when they're stored in this way?
They're usually go through a very high heat process in order to extract the fat out of the seed. So just that process alone renders them rancid.
And if they didn't go through that process, there's no way to get the oil out of the seed.
There's cold pressed.
Okay.
But then
like olive oil, some of it's cold pressed,
or like
right?
grapeseed oil. You might see in a health food store a cold pressed grapeseed oil.
And is that okay?
But I suppose if you were to use it on like salad dressing and not cook it, it might be okay, but it's still not. I mean, there's nothing redeemable about grapeseed oil. Like, and I'd have to look up the omega ratio, but you're much better with avocado oil or just good olive oil.
So why is avocado oil and olive oil? Why are those good for you?
They tend to be high in monounsaturated fat and then relatively low in the omega-6 fats. Like none of these things have much in the short chain omega-3 fats. Some people get kind of wrapped around the axle, though, like high oleic safflower oil is typically lower in omega-6s than olive oil is. So just on that omega-6, omega-3 side, like it can get a little bit squirrely, but then you have the additional piece of how was it processed? Like if it was cold extracted, then it's probably safer from like an oxidized fat perspective versus if it was heat extracted. So it does get a little bit complex, and that's where like a good quality olive oil or like butter or lard or tallow or something is just generally safer for most things.
Yeah, and so then we get to Then we get to these fake meat burgers, and these fake meat burgers, they're using soy oil, and then how are they making it look like meat?
I mean, kitchen chemistry. I mean, some of the stuff that Sean Baker has videos of just kids doing in their. Somebody made a pork roast, not a pork roast, a ham. Somebody did a ham, and when I couldn't believe the stuff they put in on the front end. But when they were done and they were cutting it, like it looked like ham.
Really?
And
See if you can find that one.
I mean, I was super impressed. I actually commented on like. It kind of gives me a little gut ache to look at that. But I mean, the finished product, and this is somebody just doing it in their kitchen. And I thought it looked, just looking at it from a video, if they had real ham and this fake ham, I wouldn't have told.
So this is Sean Baker. Would that be on his TikTok, you think?
Probably, yeah. Instagram or TikTok.
He's become a TikTok celebrity.
Yeah.
How many TikTok fans does he have now?
I don't know. A
It's
lot.
amazing they haven't kicked him off. TikTok is ruthless with kicking people off.
It's great with kids. I have 2 teenagers, and my son follows Paul Saladino and is now also doing that diet.
Really?
Like, and meanwhile, I've been
Telling him forever.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. That's
Yeah.
very funny. Yeah, I see his videos constantly, which is very funny to me that this is, like this
Right.
guy with a big knife eating meat has become ultra popular. But they're brutal with their censorship.
Yeah.
TikTok just removes videos left and right. They'll just call it hate speech and just yank you off.
Done.
Yeah.
But I don't know exactly, but I mean, they're going to extract the protein, some of the fiber. They're going to extract the fats from these different things, and then you start putting it together in a kitchen chemistry format to make it look like meat.
And their blood, like how are they making
beet
it?
juice.
Beet juice. Okay, so here it is. Oh, wow, that's interesting. So this person is, look at his face. What is he doing? Riding a stationary bike? Oh, God. So they're making this like weird dough with some kind of
Probably
flour.
wheat gluten.
Yeah, wheat gluten.
So this is going to give celiacs a fucking heart attack. And then what is he doing? He's like rolling it around and then
But look at this when he
wraps it.
That looks like ham.
Pretty wild.
That looks like ham.
Yeah.
And that's just in
This is
this person's kitchen.
Vegan ham. Yeah. But it's amazing, like the process that's involved in that, like all the kneading and twisting, like when he ties it into knots, he's putting all this stuff in there.
And in the film Sacred Cow, when I have Rob and Joel Salatin talking about all the inputs that go into Beyond Burger and Impossible Burgers, I actually was able to use their own promotional footage just with Rob and Joel talking about how disgusting the process is and getting this, what did you call it, biological goo?
Right.
Just over their own promotional footage of what a miracle it is of these vats that they've,
Oh, we need to see that. Is that available online? Can someone see that?
It was
process of making a Beyond Burger?
It was an Impossible Foods. It's I can look if he can't. It was just the Impossible Foods, like making of Impossible Foods burger. Yeah. And the funny thing is their only claim, so they can't win on nutrition. They try to win on ethics, right? So they try to say no animal died for this.
Okay, here it is. The making of an Impossible Burger. Wow, looks legit. Look at that. It so looks like a burger. There it is. How do they taste? I haven't had one.
I haven't had one.
Don't you think you should have one? Just a comment? No?
I could take that bullet, I guess.
I feel like I should
there's
take. I
They
should take
actually
one of them
put
bullets.
heme in it.
There's another one.
Oh,
with,
wait a minute. No, I did have one. I had one. My friend CK brought it to one of the shows that Chappelle and I were doing at Stubbs.
Do you know if it's one of these?
Heme, the magic ingredient in the Impossible Burger. Heme.
It could be
sounds-
that one because you can see the vats in the background, and you just
Anyway, I had one. I had a burger that was in it, and it just like tasted like a bland burger. It was from some local place that makes some plant-based burgers and then some like real burgers.
Mm-hmm.
So this is them getting excited about these smash burgers that are made. Look at these guys. This is just like a real burger. Has anybody ever eat them and go, what the fuck is this? This is not a burger. Why are you feeding me this, man? So,
I mean, it's some great kitchen chemistry.
yeah.
It's-
Look at the fake blood, the beet juice. And then they have to get the flavor profile, right? So, but basically when you're eating it as a burger, then you're eating all the other stuff, the bun, and there's the lettuce and the tomato and the pickle and the, maybe you got a little sauce on there or some ketchup. It's probably easier to get that as a reasonable facsimile.
with all the other
Yeah,
stuff.
that looks
yeah.
like beet juice. I drink beet juice. Should I drink beet juice?
It releases nitric oxide. Like beets and beet juice are pretty legit. Yeah.
Really good, like before training,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
but in limited amounts, right? Because isn't too much raw beets toxic?
Yes. Yeah. The salicylates in it. Yeah. It could make your kidneys
Too much
fail.
raw beets. So every now and then have a beet juice.
I think more like a ounce or something. Yeah.
It's funny that these people think that they're eating something healthy while they're eating this big ass bread bun. It's kind of funny, right? It's kind of funny, like the promotion of this as a health food, and then you see them eating this fat bread bun. They're like, hey,
So they can't really win on health. They've all given up their health claims.
have they? What was the
Pretty
initial
much.
health claims?
That it's healthier and everything.
Looks good. I gotta say that looks good.
They'll say it's less saturated fat.
Doesn't it look good, Jamie?
Is the cheese healthy and all that shit too?
Oh, I like cheese.
I mean, cheese.
It was probably vegan cheese too,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, right? Which is like, who knows what that is.
It's a lot of whatever it is.
That's a crazy burger. That's for a glutton who's also a vegan. There's 80 stacks of patties on that sucker. But you, so you're saying like their initial claims that have been
Yeah, so now when I go to their
Invalidated.
websites, I don't see a lot of health claims. And I do know someone who's working on really taking those products and comparing them to meat, and breaking it out for vitamins and minerals, because it's just not going to win. But now, so their main claims are now carbon, less carbon,
right.
and completely ignoring all the other ecosystem function pieces that monocropping, but at least
The
it's less.
damaging aspects of it.
Right. So, like in all these, United Nations Food System Summit, we all have to reduce our carbon, and everyone is so laser myopically focused on just carbon, and that I think really comes from these fake meat companies, because that's the only thing that they have.
Is that a valid claim that production of this fake meat is like pound for pound a reduction of carbon emissions versus animal-based?
No.
No. How so? Like even the grossest version of animal-based agriculture, factory farming?
So, because most of the greenhouse gases are coming from cattle, as part of their digestive system, its methane gets emitted. And after 10 years, the methane gets broken into H2O, water, and CO2, carbon dioxide. And it goes back down into the plants. The plants release the O2 in photosynthesis. And then the carbon becomes the plant, the roots, and then it can actually store carbon in the ground. And then the cow eats the carbon. And so it's a cycle. And I actually have a graphic showing the methane cycle versus fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are mining ancient carbon from the Earth's core and pumping it straight into the atmosphere with no...
It could be part of a cycle, but it's going to be through plants and animals.
Okay, so we're seeing there's a beautiful sort of a infographic chart that shows how the carbon from the atmosphere gets converted in the methane it's converted, and so a lot of people think it's cow farts. It's actually cow burps that are the big producer of methane, right? And then it shows the cow's carbon cycle, meat and milk, and how the poop. And this is like, to explain this without saying everything on the chart, and even if I said everything on the chart, it wouldn't
I
work.
have all these charts at Sustainable Dish /Rogan, and
Okay.
people can just take them and share.
Great. Sustainable Dish is your website?
Yes.
Okay. So what the difference is, when the cows are emitting this methane, we're thinking of it as just carbon equals bad. But the carbon that they're emitting, and the way that there is a cycle, that they're eating this grass, they're belching, it goes into the air, it becomes H2O and carbon, and then the carbon goes back into the ground, it gets into the grass, they eat it again, and it goes on and on and on. And it's a normal part of what it means to be a ruminant animal on a planet that has grass, and you eat that grass.
Yeah, and so in the U.S., in North America, we don't have more methane-emitting animals than we did before we got rid of the bison and the elk and all the other natural ruminants that were already here. And so we don't have a net bigger amount of methane. We just have cows instead of bison and deer.
And the crazy thing is, even if we did, it's still part of a cycle. To get to the point where the cow is emitting methane, you had to pull carbon dioxide out of the air into the plant, gets sequestered in the plant until the animal eats it. But the cyclical part really, and you had Stephen Koonin on recently. Like he talks, I think he talked a little bit about the differences between the cyclical, pieces of this story versus just mining ancient carbon and releasing it. But the accounting really needs to be different, because the danger that we get into. We discovered recently that shellfish produce huge amounts of methane, termites, rice paddies. Like, there's all these biogenic methane sources that then people start freaking out. And there was actually some scientists that were asking, should we eradicate shellfish so that we reduce their carbon footprint? And it's like they're suggesting that we reduce the amount of life on the planet so that we can protect life on the planet. And
Or in Sweden with the moose.
Yeah, Sweden,
The Green Party in Sweden wanted to kill all the moose in Sweden because they emit methane.
What?
Yeah. It didn't go.
Really?
It didn't pass, but it was proposed.
Oh my God!
And this
That's
is
so loony.
This carbon tunnel vision, where you get so focused on carbon release and you lose the bigger picture of all this other stuff that's going on.
That is so loony. Kill all the moose because they emit carbon,
right?
But
because they emit methane.
That's what's driving these poor kids in New York to eat vegan school lunches, and I mean.
So who started all this nonsense? Where's this? Is it Bill Gates?
I think it.
Bill, I'm a fan of your operating system. I don't want to say I'm not all bad on you, buddy. I think you need better friends, but.
I mean, we go into it a little bit, how meat became a scapegoat, and meat is a very powerful. It's the most powerful food we eat. It's masculine. It's strength. It's bloody. It represents a lot of things. We used to have sacrificial animals, and meat is also seen as barbaric and impure and unnecessary and too masculine, and so there's this deep, weird cultural narrative that's really hard to tease out exactly where it all came from initially. I mean, we idealize vegetarian cultures as more pure than ours,
right.
And there's a really great example of that, just showing. I have two graphs, one showing the ideal diets in the world, and then one showing the global malnutrition. And it's interesting how the ideal diets are causing the malnutrition. But we're idealizing them because there's no harm, and it's pure, and it's all of that. So I think.
So how are the ideal diets causing malnutrition? Is it from a lack of
animal source foods? 100%.
But is it? Can they be this has always been the big debate, right? Can you have a vegan diet and be completely healthy? Can you do it? Is there a right way to do it? Like we were talking about adding sustainable or adding amino acids, adding vitamins. Is there a way to do it?
I think if someone is young and healthy already, probably was raised breastfed well and raised on enough, good nutrition. There does appear to be some people that do okay on a vegan diet for a period of time.
Is there a rough estimate of like what percentage?
I mean, no. Most vegans, give it up. 85% give it up within 3 months, and it's usually a health event. So it's not ideal. I mean, just from a pure humans are omnivores, and we need the nutrients in animal source foods.
I remember reading about this guy who was a vegan. He was a vegan for years, and he finally decided he's having all these health problems, and he ate a piece of salmon, and he said it felt like he was having an orgasm.
Yeah.
Like he couldn't believe how good his
I read
body
that
felt.
one.
Like it's like,
Wow.
it's sad. Like I hate being the "I told you so" guy. Like I want people to be able, if you don't want any animals to die for your food, and they're gonna die anyway, unfortunately. But if you want that, does anybody want any coffee or anything?
I'm good.
You good? Because of that, you don't like. It's an uncomfortable discussion because so many people are so ideologically connected to this idea that a vegan diet is like better, more karma-free, like healthier.
And we're seeing what we're seeing with younger people is that health isn't driving it; it's ideology that's driving it, right? And so they will suffer personally for their ideology. And so they're really clinging on to the carbon story and the ethics story.
Well, a lot of them become these vegan influencers, and then they get busted eating fish.
Yeah.
Then they get attacked by the community. I've seen that happen multiple times,
Right.
where people were like really suffering, and they started eating meat, and then people went crazy on them.
Or there was that piece where if they're out drinking, they have a tendency to snack on like some burgers.
Oh,
and-
that's a
yeah.
giant percentage of vegetarians will eat meat when they're drunk.
Yeah. When we set in to do the book, and this was a long time ago, we thought that we were going to tackle the ethical part of this thing first. So we cover the health, environmental, and ethical considerations of a meat-inclusive food system is kind of the big deal. But one of the things that became interesting, Diana really kind of spearheaded the health side of the research, is that it becomes really hard to grow a human on a vegan diet. I mean, like you look at moms and their nutrient needs and then passing that to the next generation, breast milk, raising kids. Like when you start trying to push this thing forward, it's really hard. People can do it, but it's
So you're talking about when a woman is pregnant?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's been documented cases of
Was it
pregnant.
Finland?
What's that?
Was it Finland that they did the interview with the wealthy Finnish families that were vegan, and like they had really pretty terrible nutrient deficiencies within these folks, and they're wealthy, they're educated, they're supplementing, and they weren't able to consistently pull this off. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, we see babies. So B12 deficiency causes permanent brain damage, like irreversible, or it can. And B12 supplements, if vegans take the vegan version of the B12 supplement, it is actually an analog. It's not real B12, and your cells think it's B12. They'll absorb it, but then it actually blocks real B12. It can make your B12.
It blocks?
Yeah, it's a B12 analog. It's not actually B12. It just pretends to be B12.
But I thought you can get B12 from algae.
It's not true B12.
Really?
Yeah.
So when you're getting B12 from like blue-green algae and spirulina and all that kind of stuff, like what are you?
From my understanding, it's a B12 analog and not true B12.
It's above my pay grade. I don't know. I think it's an isomer. I think it looks. It may be like the folate needs to be a right-hand shape, and this stuff is a left-hand shape, and so it can
And
plug
so
in. And
is it partially effective? Is it?
So there was a documented case of a vegan breastfeeding mother who was supplementing with B12 and her baby died from a B12 deficiency.
And she was supplementing with the vegan form.
Mm-hmm.
No, it could be a rare issue
could be
with
it's,
her?
one person. But when we look at general populations, kids who don't have access to meat are much more likely to be stunted, to have delayed cognitive development, physical development, behavioral problems. And we only have one study that looked at kids with meat versus less meat. There's only one randomized control trial. Everything else is like, oh, this population ate meat and this one didn't, and these guys got more cancer. It must be the meat. You can't make policy on those observational studies. So this randomized control trial was in Kenya. The kids at school that got a meat snack did better than the milk group and the over calories group. And that's the only evidence that we have. And so there's no evidence at all that pulling meat away from children is going to result in healthier kids.
Now, when you get a standard B12 supplement, like non-vegan, what is that from?
I'm honestly not sure. I don't know if they extract it or if it's purely synthetic.
If
I
you
think
get
it
a
probably,
synthetic version of B12, wouldn't that be sufficient for a vegan?
I would think so. Yeah.
I know that there's non-vegan forms of B12, and I don't know what it's from.
Like actually, not analog, but actually actual B12. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when a person is doing that, like what is going on in their body? Their body thinks it's B12, so it acts like it's got enough B12, and then it's just not getting it.
Yeah. Chris Kresser writes about it. I'm going to pull up his study right now.
So there's certain toxins that you can do competitive inhibition so that the toxin doesn't get into cells. So it's something that looks like the toxin. It binds to the receptor site. It can keep it out. But it can work both ways. So you can have different nutrients in our body. Like amino acids are, like they call it L-lysine and L-dopa and whatnot because they're left-hand shaped. If you were to put them together in 3D space, they could have an orientation that's either left-handed or right-handed. The right-handed amino acids, by and large, aren't biologically active. And so there's a number of things like that within the nutrients that, trying to think of another one, like D-L-phenylalanine. Like people will use that for chronic pain. It's both the D and the L form. Normally, L-phenylalanine is the form that we use, but the D form of phenylalanine seems to have some interaction in the brain where it actually causes some pain reduction. But normally the D or the R form of those types of nutrients don't really work in our physiology. One
of the things that you hear about a lot lately is the idea of bugs being a viable food source. Mm-hmm. And that might be a way to get vegetarians or vegans to eat like a sort of a living protein source, because there's a lot of vegans that don't seem to give a fuck about bugs. It's really interesting. Like I lived next to an ashram when I lived in Colorado, and I was visiting this lady who lived at the ashram. We were talking about something, and she was spraying bug spray. She was killing bugs. And I was like, hey.
What's the story there?
You're supposed to be a Buddhist. Like, you're not supposed to be killing bugs. And she's like, well, there's certain concessions that we have to make. We have bugs that get in our trash. And I was like, oh my God. Like, how do you're a murderer. Like, this is like mass scale slaughter of life forms.
Buggage.
Yeah, if you look at we have to make this distinction. Like, what is important? Is it life, or is it life with fur? Is it life that weighs more than a pound? Is it like people don't seem to get that upset if you kill a bug, right? You could kill a bug on you and not even dispose of the body, and no one freaks out. Like, if you swat a mosquito, you just basically kind of move your hand a little bit and fuck you. It's small enough that we seem to be okay with that thing. Just, where's the body? Where did you put that? You just murdered a life form. No one gives a shit. But if you stomped on a mouse in front of people, they'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with you, Rob? Why'd you just stomp on that mouse? That's gross. Clean that. It gets to a certain level where we decide it's either cute enough or large enough. And when it gets to things like a buffalo, that's it's large enough so that that's too big to kill.
Yeah.
But is that equivalent to an ant? Because that lady's out there spraying bugs. She's killing at least a life form. Is that one life form that's an ant, this tiny little thing, is that as valuable to you as a big bison? And if not, why? Tell me why.
And then especially if you look at how it's produced, right? Regenerative ag versus typical monocropping.
Right.
So if you're going to have one cow, that's almost 500 pounds of meat. And if that cow was raised in a way that increased total life underground and above ground and brought all these birds back and everything, that was a life that actually led to more life.
Yeah. Well, if you buy corn, you're definitely responsible for some death. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you have a monocrop field of corn, the only way they're going to keep those animals from eating the corn and to keep, when they plow over the corn and they extract it, things are dying. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
And then they'll say, but I didn't intend for it to die.
I don't know if that's good enough.
Right.
I mean, if you're like shooting a gun into a crowd and you don't intend for anybody to die, but people die,
Right.
I think you're still responsible
Yeah, it
for
doesn't
that
hold
death.
up very well.
You might not be looking where you're pointing the trigger, but I think that this idea of a zero-sum game, this idea of never losing any life, it's kind of crazy. And one thing that people that are proponents of plant-based diets really hate is when you bring up plant intelligence. They really hate that. They really hate the idea that plants might not just have strategies to avoid predation, but might have real-time maneuvers that they do in terms of like changing their chemicals, where that changes their flavor profile, emitting these defense chemicals because they don't want to get eaten. And there's some sort of an intelligence that plants not just have, but they have with this symbiotic relationship to fungus under the ground. And this mushroom, the mycelium, and the root structures of these plants are sharing resources, and they communicate, and it's a really complex system that reeks of intelligence. And we don't totally understand it, but we have this thought in our head that if it doesn't move, then it's okay to kill, even though it's a life form. But we've made this distinction that a plant life, it does not have the same feelings. It doesn't cause pain. It doesn't cause emotional harm. It's not like us. It's as removed from us as possible while still being a life form to the point where we could just eat it.
Yeah, and in order to make a field for corn or soy, also, you have to annihilate whatever was there before, like whatever forest, like you're killing habitat and animals in order to make room for this monocrop to happen. And then the pesticides and insecticides and all that stuff too.
Yeah, and having that kind of a structure where you have this one plant growing in this massive quantity is totally alien to anything that you ever find on Earth in terms of like, I mean, maybe you'll find grass, like large grasslands. But then again, the grasslands is sort of like this weird little honeypot where the buffalo come over and eat the grass and they shit and then the bugs and the whole thing and the manure, and it feeds itself. It makes sense. There's none of that going on with a monocrop soybean.
Well, and it's really not a monocrop too. Like there can be dozens or hundreds of different plants in that grass ecosystem, and they change throughout the season. And
good point.
Yeah, and the amount of cropland that we have that can actually support that has healthy enough soil, rainfall, or access to irrigation, is flat so that you can drive a tractor over it, is actually quite small.
Now, bugs. Are bugs good for you?
For eating them?
Yes.
I've heard that they are. I don't think my opinion on like crickets is that it's going to be a great animal feed for like chickens. I don't think, or maybe a bar dare for dudes. You know?
Dare?
Yeah, like.
You're talking to the guy who used to host Fear Factor. Crickets are small potatoes.
Okay.
Compared to
I've
uteri.
eaten everything. I ate so much garbage when I was on that show.
But I don't see them as like a regular.
But they're a good source of B vitamins, right? I believe they're B12 rich. Like you could eat like crickets, and I believe they're a good source.
Probably because they're animal.
Yeah, and it's a little bit even like the cultured meat, though, is that you still need an input to feed those critters. And I think that they could and probably should play some sort of a significant role going forward. But what is it that we're going to allocate to those critters?
Right, to grow them.
Yeah,
what are you
going
to feed them with, and where are you going to grow them, and how much land do you need to grow crickets?
Also, cricket farms are disgusting.
They are pretty nasty.
Oh, yeah.
In what way?
Any picture of a cricket farm, they're like these cardboard tenement cities.
Oh, well,
there's a lot of cricket poop, and if you if you don't, so my daughters got really geeked out because they want to figure out
Is this a cricket farm?
These are cricket farms.
Cricket farm.
So if you don't manage them, the crickets become
Thailand.
cannibals and they eat each other.
Oh, Jesus. Of course they do. Little
So,
monsters.
look at
Can
their
you
crawling
show
all
me a
over the
video
walls.
of a cricket farm? I want to see what they look like. So when I was in Mexico, we checked into this hotel, and they had a bowl of cooked crickets.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a normal snack. And my girls were like, "Yeah, I'm not eating that." I was like, "I'll eat it." I got one of my daughters to eat it. She ate a cricket.
We used
They
to
weren't
get
bad.
a cricket protein bar,
Yeah,
and
see,
my
this-
girls liked it.
They're kind of salty. So what do you have to do to keep them from eating each other? Just make sure they
You
have a lot
to
of
make,
food?
apparently, it hits some population threshold, and then they'll just start.
Oh God!
killing
Like
each
nature
other.
has a built-in safe mechanism to make sure
Yeah.
that, and so that's them all ground up. What is that? Like a cricket cheesecake? What
It
is
looks
that?
like a carrot cake.
Yeah,
Carrot cake.
carrot cake rather. Oh, look at her. She's bold. She sticks her tongue out with the cricket on it. So these are like different kinds of cricket proteins that they've turned these things into, and cricket snacks.
You-
So look at this poor guy. Why has he got a mask on? Is it because of the pandemic or just chicken
Probably
smell?
chicken.
It's hard to tell, right? These days, like,
Right.
why are they wearing masks? Is it because of the pandemic, or is it because this is what they do when they work around?
So
chicken
these
shit?
guys are working. So the chitin,
cricket
the,
shit,
the
or-
shells, like you can get an allergy to it, kind of like
Oh.
a shellfish allergy. so
Isn't
they're
it
probably wearing
very
it for
closely
that.
related to
Yeah, I mean, if
shellfish?
you have a shellfish allergy, you
Oh,
can't,
I can
can't
speak
eat
to
those.
this
Yeah.
because when we were on Fear Factor, we found out that if you have a shellfish allergy, you are also allergic to roaches.
Yeah.
We found that out by feeding people roaches.
Oh, that's a nice
and then
way
an
to find it out.
EpiPen and
their throat seized up, and the guy had to leave the show.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, dude. Crickets are arthropods like shrimp, crabs, and lobsters. This means they contain some of the same proteins, so individuals who are allergic to shellfish may develop an allergy to crickets. Yeah, it would have been nice if the people that were running Fear Factor fucking asked those folks. But hey, it's a long time ago. So, are they? What's the protein and the nutrient profile of a cricket? Is it similar to an animal?
I think they're really good. You know, like pound per
Probably.
pound, their conversion of feed into basically nutrient upcycling, I think, is really good.
Oh, here
It's
it goes.
just
Look at this. Crickets are a good source of vitamins, minerals, and fiber. In addition to protein, crickets are high in many other nutrients, including fat, calcium, potassium, zinc, magnesium, copper, folate, biotin, panthotic. How do you say that?
Pantothenic.
Pantothenic acid, and iron. One study found that the iron content of crickets was 180% higher than that of beef.
But you'd have to eat a 4-ounce block of cricket.
You wouldn't be doing that if you were hungry. What if they're good? What if they taste good?
If
Well,
you have the right
lobsters taste
dipping
good.
sauce. Yeah.
If it's a shellfish thing, right? Like shellfish tastes good.
right.
Everybody loves lobster, right? If they take, I mean, isn't there a way?
Yeah. And you know, I think that this is at least some of the questions that we need to ask. Like right now, 50% of the food that we produce globally isn't eaten. It basically gets landfilled. And so we could, you know, when people start asking about scalability, at a minimum, we should be better about what we do with the food that we have. Like I forget the name of the outfit, but some folks in New Mexico, they have a pork operation, and they've made relationships with the local grocery stores and restaurants, and basically their food that doesn't get eaten, expired food, they send it to the pigs, they autoclave it, they basically sterilize it, and then they feed it to these animals. And this would have otherwise just gone into a landfill. And we could do this like everywhere. And this is part of the problem that we have is because of zoning and because of cultural things, like we could produce a lot more food in kind of a regional fashion and then be much more efficient with it. We could cut like 50% of our food is wasted right now. So what if we took 10%?
Is that just nationwide, or is
It's
that
kind of a global
Really?
number, yeah. So what if 10% of that got allocated into cricket and mealworm and different things, and we use those to produce a possibly vegan acceptable protein source, or it gets used to feed the chickens so that they, you know, there's just a lot of inefficiency there. But there's also a lot of like cultural change that needs to happen to make some of those things more acceptable.
This is sort of unrelated, but there was a guy who ate bad Chinese food. It was like leftover Chinese
Had to get
food.
amputated.
Yeah,
stuff.
his body went septic. He had to get his legs amputated, his feet amputated. The photos are absolutely horrific. It was just some leftover food that apparently it was sitting out, maybe something, and bacteria got in it, and he ate it. And within hours afterwards, his body was going septic. Like, and he has these lesions all over his body. Wait till you see this. This is so crazy. I've never seen anything like this from eating food. I thought if you ate bad food, you just get diarrhea and you throw up and you'd have
Apparently
food poisoning.
He got really bad.
I mean,
food.
I've had food poisoning. I'm sure you guys have as well, right? It's gross. It makes you feel terrible.
Was it like botulism? Did he get botulism from it?
I
or-
can't. I don't know. You find it?
There's a lot of stories. So I was trying to find
The New
actual
York
pictures.
Post one is the best because they have all the juicy photos. Because you know how the New York Post does it.
Classy.
Yeah, it's classy as it gets, and like it's so crazy. Oh no, this isn't the same one. This is it's Chinese food.
Yeah.
It's it's very recent.
I know, but it didn't, New York Post didn't come up that way.
Just Chinese food. Google Chinese food.
Oh, there's noodles.
Yeah, but just Google leftover. It's a news story, bro. It's like leftover Chinese food.
All of these stories are that story. It's just not the New
why
York
were they
Post
showing a spaghetti bowl then?
I don't. That particular one went to the wrong one. I don't know.
Oh, that looks like
I
lo
have it.
mein.
I know I have it on my phone because I sent it to somebody.
I'm just saying, the New York Post one didn't pop up. It gave me a different story.
I
From
wonder if
2019.
they took it down.
It's too gnarly.
Yeah, I don't
Legs
think
and
so.
fingers.
I have
Oh, there it
specifically
is.
New York Post, but it's not.
All right, just try to find
there's
one.
one.
But that's not the correct one.
Well,
Legs and
try
fingers.
the one
A day
ago.
right there. Try that one, and see if it has the
Yeah,
images.
none of the other ones are having the images. Is the problem.
I'm kind of happy
I was doing a
about
lot of
that.
clicking really fast, and I wasn't finding anything with the images.
Oh,
I'm good.
man has legs.
Well, I can go to images on here.
Yeah, let's go
and
to images.
I'm sure it'll come up.
Well, that's just noodles. They're just showing noodles. That's unfortunate.
All right,
Anyway,
give me a second.
I found it, and it was it was horrific. This guy had like his feet were like a gross multicolored thing, and all of his skin, and it was just from it going septic from bad food.
How bad did that smell when he ate it? Like,
It might not
how
have smelled
does
bad.
it have to be bad?
Haven't you had
Oh.
food poisoning? It didn't smell
Yeah,
bad at all.
it's true, but I haven't had amputations from it, so that's crazy.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly
Oh.
it. So these are the photographs. On admission to the hospital, patient had a rapidly evolving diffuse reticular purplish rash on the face, not shown, chest and abdomen, arms and legs. So its whole body was covered in these horrible purple lesions and barely made it. I mean,
Damn.
it's really, really rough when you see it. It's horrible. And so let's go to the top of it. So like figured out what happened. Okay, it says the patient had been well until 20 hours before this admission. This is crazy. When diffuse abdominal pain and nausea developed after he ate rice, chicken, and lo mein leftovers from a restaurant meal. Multiple episodes of emesis, is that the word?
Throwing up.
Emesis occurred with vomitus that was either what are they trying to do to me here? Bilious or red brown. The abdominal pain and vomiting were followed by the development of chills, generalized weakness, progressively worsening diffuse myalgias, is that right? Myalgias, chest pain, shortness of breath, headache, neck stiffness, and blurry vision. 5 hours before this admission, purplish discoloration of the skin developed, and a friend took the patient to the emergency department of another hospital for evaluation. Upon arrival, the emergency department of the hospital, 4.5 hours before this admission, the patient reported diffuse myalgia, scale of 8 to 10, indicating most severe pain. On examination, he appeared pale, anxious, and moderately distressed. He answered questions appropriately and was oriented to person, place, time, and situation. Okay, blood specimens were obtained, complete culture content, approximately 40 minutes after the patient's arrival. During 30 minutes, tachypnea worsened and labored breathing, hypoxemia, cyanosis. This is a lot of fucking medical terminology here. Supplemental oxygen was administered, so he was just like fading fast, resulting in oxygen saturation of 83%. Then oxygen was administered through a high-flow nasal cannula at the rate of 40 liters per minute. Wow. So this is a medical thing. This is a medical journal that's talking about this.
It never really says they did cultures on it, but it didn't say what he came back with.
He smoked 2 packs of cigarettes weekly. That's not a lot. Smoked marijuana daily, holla, and drank 2 alcoholic beverages approximately 2 times per week. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Crazy.
Okay, no more Chinese food.
Well, it's not that.
I think I read of another friend ate it too, but he didn't get as sick. He just had like a little stomachache, and this kid
Wow.
went the other way with it.
Oh, wow.
I think I read that. It's not saying that in here, I don't think, but
Oh, wow.
I read it initially.
That dude's got bragging rights.
That's all he's got left.
Shouldn't
They
you-
cut
no, the
everything
other
else
guy.
off.
No, the other guy. The guy that didn't get cut up.
Right.
The guy that also ate it but didn't really get sick.
Right.
You know, when he's wheeling his friend around. Remember, I ate the same food, bro.
Just tougher.
Horrible joke. So, do you think that there is a future where people can have this sort of this philosophy of having a plant-based diet is like to do the least amount of harm? Now, if you had some sort of a organic back garden diet and you lived off of your garden, that's probably the most karma-free, right? If you just want to eat plant-based foods and then you have crickets for your protein.
I mean, it depends on where you live because in most of the country you can't grow year round. So
Right.
it gets tricky. And I think if we're talking about least harm, and one of the things like Rob was trying to say with, everyone likes to lead with these ethics arguments. I want to do least harm. And so we were going to lead the book with ethics. But my thinking was that you have to fully understand the nutritional implications of like pulling meat away from people who really need it. And then you have to understand the environmental argument of like what monocrop agriculture is and all that kind of stuff to then understand the ethical, to have like an intelligent ethical debate. You can't just say it's wrong.
Okay, so when we're talking about nutrients, and we were talking about the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger and stuff like that, so they don't really claim that it's better for you nutritionally anymore.
Not so much. I mean, there's
imply
new
it.
crazy studies coming out saying that you should limit your red meat to 0 if you want to live. But those aren't. This is going to get
Those are going to be
reversed.
exhausting, though, because you're going to have to talk to somebody that have read those studies. They're going to stick in your face. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a friend who's overweight who's a vegan who was like to claim that I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm like, bro, look at you. Mm-hmm. This is so crazy. Like, you can't be healthy. Eating whatever you're eating is not good.
And I think for a healthy, 25-year-old athlete or whatever, if they want to be vegan, that's fine. As a mom and a dietitian, I have a big problem with disadvantaged kids being
Yes.
Meat being pulled away from them as
But-
policy for virtue signaling.
For sure. But as an athlete, when an athlete is a young, healthy athlete and they're eating a vegan diet, do you think they're leaving something on the table in terms of like the nutrition that they could be getting and the performance that they could be getting?
Totally.
It seems like it.
Seems
Yeah.
like it, right? Like I'm not aware of any top of the food chain LeBron James type people that are vegans. Like when you look at an elite athlete, a Canelo Alvarez, like someone's at the very top of their game. I don't really see any of them that I'm aware of that are vegans. Doesn't mean it's not possible, but I mean, I don't know of any who's the best in their field that's a vegan. Do you know of any? Are there any soccer players that are elite?
Offhand, I don't. And I mean, there's always this piece too of could they have been better? Maybe they are better
Right.
being vegan, or maybe they could have been better with kind of a mixed diet. It's always a tough one. It does seem like like the Game Changers movie, like all the athletes they kind of detailed in that thing, everybody went retrograde after they went vegan. Like the strongman guy got injured a bunch and kind of retired. Like everybody that
The
they had in
strongman
there
guy's
kinda,
a tough case,
Yeah.
because that guy's chock full of steroids. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, that's a steroided up business. Unless they're testing people on a regular basis, and I'm sure there's some that do get tested. When you're dealing with those guys that are just enormous human beings that are lifting the most amount of weight possible, a lot of those guys are on the juice.
right, and that can
Yeah.
paper over a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to
Yeah.
say like what's really going on then.
Right.
Well, and also with these athletes, they're genetically gifted, period. Right? Like they can probably get away with eating a lot of fast food and be pretty a lot healthier than me, So I think, when you're already starting with like the ideal specimen of human,
Right.
and then if they give up plants or meat for 6 months, it may not have the same impact as somebody who has already damaged guts or an autoimmune disease or is an older person or is a developing kid who needs, to grow.
There's
So-
been some football players that went vegan, right? That were like elite football players. But didn't one of them just kept getting injured after
Yeah.
he went vegan?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would you get it? Is it lack of protein, you think? Like what would...
I think just globally, you are consuming less nutrients, and definitely the protein piece is a big deal. And then if you aren't recovering the same way, like, do you track heart rate variability? Do you ever?
Yeah, I do when I wear that whoop strap.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, like, what's a cool insight with HRV is that if you're sleeping well and your total stress load, your allostatic load is low comparatively, then you've got more resources to put into recovery. But if you're eating a diet, whether it's junk food or what have you, that is causing some degree of stress, that is not providing the fundamental building blocks, then more energy has to be allocated to get you back to square one again. So this is where like optimizing sleep and nutrition and gut health and all these things, really it is something that if you make money from your physicality, like it behooves one to do that because you want to put every bit of recovery, juice into that process because it gets you back in. You can train harder, can train more often. So that's where I could see like the soft tissue injuries and stuff like that starting to be a problem.
But it's kind of guesswork when a football player gets injured because it's kind of an
There's so
injury
much,
sport.
yeah.
It's a sport.
Yeah.
You'd be really cherry picking if you said
Right.
that this is why he got injured.
Right.
So back to this burger thing. So the burger has soybean oil, pea protein, beet juice, and what else is in there?
I think those are the main.
And then what kind of malarkey are they doing to glue it all together?
I mean, we saw again like pretty impressive stuff just with what the person did in the kitchen making the ham.
That looked nasty, honestly.
But
I mean,
it looked
did
like ham at the end,
It looked ham-like.
Ham-like,
But
yeah.
the burger looked pretty damn good.
Yeah.
With the cheese
Right.
on the top of it. It was looking all greasy.
Yeah.
That looked pretty good.
So it's soy protein concentrate, coconut oil, sunflower.
Coconut oil is good for you, right? Isn't that good for you?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's something good for you. Ingredient number 2 is good for you.
Sunflower oil, potato protein.
Is that good?
I don't eat. You need to eat 10 potatoes to get the protein that you can
So
get in 4 ounces of beef.
And just really quick on that, what do you need to do so if they're marketing this as like a sustainability feature, how much energy goes into raising a potato, bunch of potatoes, then you process them, extract the protein out so it can be put into that.
Right.
This is where, like what they call a life cycle analysis. And they did do that between like White Oak Pastures and the Impossible Burger. And White Oak Pastures ended up having a lower carbon footprint. And that, again, that's not the whole story, but there's other pieces to it.
I'm sorry, White Oak Pastures in comparison to...
Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger.
So is this compared to their
Their
factories?
their
or
burger, the process of creating
from the ground?
a life cycle is like a cradle to grave study where it's the whole.
So they're following all the plants that can be converted into seed oils and all the jazz that...
I mean, there's probably limitations on how far back in the supply. I know that they didn't go into some of the mined minerals that they need for, all the vitamins and minerals. They didn't go that far, but pretty far.
Okay, and what was the results?
The White Oak Pastures ended up being net carbon negative, so it's pulling more out of the environment than what it's putting in throughout their whole process. And this includes the composting and the inclusion of like your
Chickens.
chicken and pork, like it's the whole operation.
Now, is this pound for pound? Like, how do they do this? Is
Yeah.
I believe so. It was literally like a pound per pound comparison.
So a pound for pound from a regenerative farm, pound for pound for beef and chicken and whatever they grow, whatever animal-based protein versus this plant-based stuff, that there's more carbon being emitted from the plant-based stuff and the production of it, and it's worse for the environment.
Yeah, and funny, it was kind of weird, but I think it was literally the same number, but the opposite direction. It was like you had to eat one White Oak Pastures burger to nullify the carbon footprint of one Impossible Burger.
Yeah.
Like it was like 4.6 or something like that.
I think it was 3.5
Yeah,
or something
yeah.
like that. So it's a grass-fed beef farm in Georgia.
So in terms of harm to the environment, that's at least from a regenerative farm like White Oak Pastures.
Mm-hmm.
And how do White Oak Pastures run their thing? They run it like Polyface Farms,
Very
like
similar.
that kind of deal.
Yeah.
Now we were talking earlier about sustainability, like the ability or scalability rather, the ability to do that for the entire country. Mm-hmm. Is that really possible?
Yeah, so I consulted some of the top experts in this area when I wrote the book. And we went through the numbers, and if we look at the underutilized grassland that we already have, so there's a lot of like BLM land or Forest Service land that's just not being grazed. There's farmers being paid through the CRP program to actually leave their fields fallow. So if we look at regenerative agriculture as actually being way more efficient than typical grazing, and I put that at 30% better, but most farmers will tell you I have 4 times more animals on my property because my soil is so fertile and the grass is so healthy. So I did go through the numbers for the US, and it does look like we have the land to finish, because remember, all cattle start on grass, so it's really just those last 3 months that we're looking to finish. We're looking to take them. It takes longer, but it's the 3 months that would be in a feedlot to then finish them on grass.
But to finish them on grass,
It would take longer than 3 months, but we're not looking at the entire life of the cow is not spent in a feedlot.
Okay, but when you're saying feedlot, are you saying are they feeding them hay, are they feeding them grass, or are they feeding them grain?
So at a feedlot, they're getting like a ration of corn, of mashed up
Right.
Corn stalks from the ethanol industry. So they're getting like food scraps that we can't use.
And this is to fatten them up. But what about pure grass-fed, which is supposed to be the most healthy, correct? Is that debatable?
Yeah, it is actually.
This is one of the things that gets us in a lot of trouble. Like we started with a bunch of assumptions, and one of the assumptions was that pastured meat is nutritionally superior to conventional meat. And we turned over every study that you could find in this thing, and what you find is that pastured meat has a little bit more omega-3s than conventional meat. But if you're looking at just the omega-3s, you need to eat like 8 pounds of meat to get as much omega-3s as what you get out of like 3 ounces of salmon. So it's not the place to look for that. And pastured dairy is far more nutritious than conventional dairy. Wild-caught seafood is far more nutritious. Eggs are far, far more nutritious. But it's this weird thing. Like, it would have been so nice if just pastured meat was like nutritionally superior. We could have like had this, soup to nut story on this thing. We even hired an independent researcher, person with a PhD in nutritional biochemistry, and we just said, hey, do a compare and contrast of conventional meat and grass-fed meat. We want to know the nutritional profile. We didn't give this person any of our information, and they arrived at exactly the same thing. But we have people really angry at us. But at the end of the day, the crazy thing is, even when you're putting things like corn stalks and weird things like that into cows, they're so good at upcycling nutrients that meat is just ruminant meat is super, super nutritious. And I think that the ethical argument for grass finishing is strong. I think the environmental argument is strong. There may be a case for like bioaccumulation, like things like glyphosate and stuff like that, but that's separate from it. And I don't think it's as compelling a thing as what most people would think. But just nutritionally, like vitamins, minerals, proteins, essential fats, essential amino acids, there's just not that big of a difference.
Why does it look so different? Because it's a darker red meat, and
it's
I would assume
leaner.
It's definitely leaner.
So finishing on corn marbleizes it.
So that's the only difference in terms of the color? It's just a lean thing?
Yeah. So yeah.
Because I was assuming it was like a nutrient density thing. Well, it's kind of nutrient dense because there's more of the actual meat versus fat.
Yeah, for sure.
But there is a benefit to the fat from meat as well.
Yeah, fat's a nutrient too.
So there is probably some benefit to a fatty piece of meat that is grain finished.
Yeah, I mean, it has more
grass-fed.
calories, so
Right.
it just depends on what your goals are, but it's not bad.
So it's not bad. Okay. So the omega-3s is the only big issue, but you really should get that from salmon anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying an organic carrot has 3 times the protein. No one is eating carrots for protein.
Right. Got it. So if we were doing that and you're trying to feed the entire country, how much more of an impact does the methane from the cows burping, and how much more of an impact is it in terms of the amount of animals that you have to move around, in terms of transportation and the fossil fuels that are emitted through that?
So ironically, I'm going to Brazil next month to speak at a cattle conference, and they are actually having to go more towards feedlots because they're getting so much pressure to reduce their carbon emissions. And so when you finish a cow on a feedlot, it's faster. And so the cow's not alive as long. And so they're emitting less methane. So it's actually, this one company, it's actually, they're being pressured to go the feedlot route.
And this is that carbon tunnel vision where they're missing all the other externalities that could be beneficial around the pastured process. Like you can reverse desertification, the ground holds more water, it doesn't create as much of a heat footprint, you get carbon sequestration, you have all the other ecosystem benefits. But this is where like this kind of neurotic focus on just greenhouse gas emissions, absent this bigger picture, you start making dumb decisions. And we're making decisions at a global food policy level that are potentially going to be really injurious. Like what they're doing in that process then, and I think they're looking just at the emissions that are coming from the animals in that case, but then what about all of the infrastructure that's necessary to get the grains to feed to the animals and what's going on with that? And I think when we do these full life cycle analyses, like what we do with the White Oaks Farms, usually the pastured process wins, but you have to be willing to accept that that is part, all that greenhouse gas emissions is part of a cycle. That stuff that's in the atmosphere today is going to be part of a plant at some point, and then part of an animal, and on and on.
Now, when you're talking about the amount of cows that you would need to feed the entire country, like what kind of a quantity of meat are we talking about per capita or per person?
So right now, Americans eat about 2 ounces of beef per person per day, and about twice that much chicken. So we're really not eating like too much meat. Everyone thinks that Americans are sitting down to a tomahawk steak every night, and it's just not true. We're going to get our protein from different sources. So I'm not saying we all need to be carnivores. And, then you have this other dilemma of the carrying capacity of Earth for humans, which gets really dicey when you even start talking about that. So we don't talk about that. But, do you want healthy humans, or do you want human feed to just have the largest number of humans possible?
Right. So 2 ounces of beef a day does not sound like a lot.
No.
So, but if you want people specifically to live on this diet like I'm living on, like if this is something that people adopt, now you're talking about many times more. How much is that sustainable? That seems like no.
I don't know. Like I don't know where that carrying capacity pops in, and I don't know. It's interesting, how much of that could be supplemented with seafood. How much of that gets like if we start integrating like the pork and the chicken and making that all biodynamic and not as impactful. How much of that could be offloaded into like insect proteins?
But if everybody ate like Sean Baker, we'd be fucked.
Probably would be some problems. Well,
I mean, we're exporting all the organ meats to other countries. We're not doing a very good job of eating those.
And there's a flip side to this, is that as a culture, we're super unhealthy. So like there was a Congressional Budget Office study back in like 2005 that was suggesting that by like 2030, 2035, the U.S. is bankrupt from diabetes-related costs. Like we'll have more costs dealing with diabetes than what we have GDP. And I don't know what COVID has done to that whole projection and whatnot.
Just diabetes?
Just diabetes alone. And this isn't even looking at like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and all these other metabolically driven diseases. And if there's one thing that, although I guess it's still controversial, but there's one thing that there's at least a little bit of synergy out in the world. People like Lane Norton and whatnot kind of sign off on this. If people undereat protein, they tend to overeat calories beyond that.
Want some of this? Looks like
Yeah,
you're looking at it. Yeah, I saw you.
And so whether you eat higher carb or lower carb, if people eat adequate protein, they tend to not overeat the other stuff. If you undereat protein, then you tend to overeat all the other things. And this is probably the big driver of this illness. So what do we do about addressing the health and healthcare issue in all this? Like in some ways we can't afford not to address this in some effective way, because we have to figure out like a global public health food policy that's going to allow people to spontaneously reduce calorie intake, or we end up with this kind of global control of the food system, and you go to buy meat and it's like a social credit score thing. It's like, sorry, comrade, you've already got your protein allowance for the month.
Yeah.
So it's
And then I
time to
looked
eat
into
bugs.
also
Yeah.
the carbon footprint of diabetes.
Oh yeah.
So
like all
you've
the
got
medical tubing and it's
amputations.
crazy.
You've got dialysis, all the plastics involved in dialysis. I mean, but shouldn't that be factored into junk food? If we're complaining about like methane from
I guess
protein.
it has to be if that many people are gonna bankrupt the country from diabetes. I mean,
Right.
if that's real. I had no idea that. I thought diabetes was fairly rare. Okay, here. The staggering costs of diabetes. 2.3 times greater healthcare costs for Americans with diabetes. $327 billion, the annual cost of diagnosed diabetes in America. More than 34 million Americans have diabetes. Holy shit.
And that's just diagnosed, right? Because there's so many more people on their way.
More than 88 million have pre-diabetes.
Oh, there we go.
Shoo.
So you're almost at half the population that's either pre or diabetic.
That is bananas. It's a third, essentially. But that's still a lot of
Right.
fucking people.
Right.
1 in 3 is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. That's nuts. What did we found out that the obesity rate in America was like 40%, right? Wasn't it something like that?
If you add overweight and obese, it's 70%.
70%. Wow. See, that is something that, obviously this is anecdotal, but, Jordan Peterson was one of the first guys that I knew that got on that carnivore diet, and he lost 40-something pounds.
Right.
And he looks amazing, and it's just like he's completely slim and lean, and he just eats nothing but steak. Like, there's something about eating meat where you get satisfied easier. When I'm eating meat by itself, I'll eat a steak, and I'm fully satisfied. But if you give me a steak and pasta, I will eat that steak, and then I'll eat the shit out of that pasta. And I'm somehow or another still hungry. I keep digging in there. Where if it was steak, it was another steak there, I'd stop, and I'd put it in the fridge. But I can't stop eating when it's pasta or bread.
Yeah, that buffet effect is interesting, where if we get more food options, we will
Yes.
tend to eat more things. When I was on the show last time, we looked at the Adam Rickman, Man versus Food, and he did this kitchen sink Sunday challenge. I think we watched this thing, but he had to eat an 8-pound ice cream sundae. And he's motoring through this thing. He gets maybe 15 minutes into it, and then he just starts visibly turning green and like starts gagging, and he's not going to make it. And he asked the waitress in this place to get him a giant plate of salty, crunchy French fries. And he would eat a couple of French fries and then a little bit of ice cream, a little bit of French fries. But because he was able to go back and forth and change the palate experience, his brain didn't tell him to stop. So the only way he would have thrown up, he would have failed eating that ice cream sundae without eating like 2,000 calories of French fries,
And
which
that's-
is just crazy.
It's weird. Weird
Yeah.
tricks you have to play in your
Yeah.
brain.
But
Oh, yeah,
There he
here we
is.
go.
yeah.
Look at him. He looks so much different now since he doesn't do that show anymore. He's all like normal size.
Right.
Like that guy must have been killing himself. I mean, just killing himself doing that show. 8 pounds of ice cream is absolutely nuts. That is so bad for you.
And it's orange sherbet at the bottom. I mean, good God.
Look at him though. It's good right now. He's getting after it. Anyway.
So
Yeah. So your body has this weird thing. If you just eat protein, like when I eat like steak and eggs in the morning, I'm very satisfied.
Yeah.
So we're in this horrible place where people are saying, but it's unsustainable.
Yes.
And so that's
I think
why
we proved it is.
Well, so you have to start with what is the ideal diet and how can we produce that in a sustainable way. But all the other groups are saying, look at our broken ag system.
Mm-hmm.
What's the most sustainable food, and how can we convert that into human feed?
Well, they're not even just doing that. It seems like they're playing funny games with the numbers, like where they're not being honest about the environmental impact. They're not being honest about the nutritional footprint. They're not being honest about any of these things. They just want this ideology promoted, which is that meat is bad for the environment. Meat is bad for the environment. I mean, I see that everywhere. And then people say it on Twitter. They say it, it's just this like cold statement. They just say meat is bad for the environment. Like, what kind of meat? Like, what are you saying? In what way? Like, are you saying like those pig farms where they leave lakes of sewage? Yep, I'm with you. That's bad for the environment. Right. When they have these horrific factory farm conditions where they're all packed in next to each other and they shit through the bottom of their cage because it's a grate and it goes into this big swampy sort of lake of sewage. Yeah, that's terrible. But if you're talking about like what Joel Salatin does, no. My thing is though, you're not going to get everybody to listen, right?
We haven't
when people
had
say that,
anybody listen. And I used to work at NPR. I have friends there. They wouldn't touch this story.
Yeah, that's.
I know
thing,
people
right?
at New York Times. They wouldn't.
Well, Netflix was super interested in the
they flew
film
me out
and got like right to the 11th hour, 59th minute, and then somebody was like, "Oh shit! Like we can't sign off on this." So. Yeah.
Meanwhile, they have the most wacky documentaries that are so full of shit on so many different things.
Right.
On UFOs and Bigfoot and fucking, the origins of currency. Netflix got some wacky shit. So does iTunes. I went to the other day, I was at home. I had a rare day off, so I just went through the documentary section of iTunes just for a goof. Or Apple TV, and I was like, what kind of fucking horse shit are you people selling? And you won't sell this? It's... what I was going to say, though, is like you're not going to – there's certain people that are just headline readers, and that is a headline reader statement that meat is bad for the environment. This is a thing. It
aligns so perfectly with so many other narratives today, too. So it's just –
also that are just headlines.
Yeah.
And there's – this really weird tendency to ignore facts that are contrary to what you've already espoused and believed in, and this is one of them. And once you've already said publicly multiple times, meat is bad for the environment, an animal-based diet is bad. Plant-based diets are the only diet that reverses heart disease. They like to say that one.
Yeah, so like I'm in a suburb outside of Boston. Everyone's environmentally conscious, right? They're educated.
It's a mess.
And
poor people.
Of course, of course they don't eat meat. None of them eat or they're cutting down, or they're flexitarian.
They're all exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all look like shit. That's what's weird. I mean, obviously not some of them. Some look great. You're gonna run to that vegan. It's all jacked. It's like, bro, I'm a vegan. I'm fucking healthy as shit. I'm like, okay,
touche.
You're one of the rare ones. You're a fucking unicorn, pal.
But it is tough because it's such a airtight, beautiful story. If you don't eat meat, you'll live forever. You'll be skinny. You'll be ethically superior. Yeah. You're saving the planet. I mean, sign me up. It sounds great.
The ethically superior parts. People love that one.
Oh, people love that one.
Because of the social media. Social media is just, it's such a great place to espouse your virtue.
Right.
That if you can, you put that little plant thing next to your bio and then put your pronouns underneath that,
you're off and running.
Nice. You got a solid solid bio there.
And then what we're suggesting, we don't even have like a solid endpoint other than mainly we make the recommendation that as to the greatest degree possible, decentralize the food production system. And depending on where
when you say that, what do you mean by that?
So people in Nebraska should probably be doing things different than people even in Texas. And I'm not in that crew where people get all bent out of shape that like an avocado is going from Mexico to Canada during the winter. Like, I don't care about that. I do think that more of our food should probably be eaten locally. But if we produce more food locally, we have much more efficiencies generally, and then a lot of these environmental problems like the lakes of like steaming pig shit and stuff like that should just be worked back into the farm. We shouldn't be poisoning waterways with
They
this
shouldn't
stuff.
be growing pigs that way.
The pig should be integrated into the whole system the way that we did about 100 years ago.
But don't you need a vast swath of land to accomplish something like that?
Not necessarily, because you don't need to always do mega scale. And this is some of the stuff that we're going to have to come to terms with also. So like in the UK, there was an experiment where they put in hedgerows around the regular, conventional farms that they had. But the hedgerows allowed for these predatory birds and insects to have somewhere to hang out. And then they would get in and eat the bugs that would, cause problems with the, like the wheat or the corn or whatever. So there was a decrease in the total amount of harvest that they had because some of the farm was allocated these hedgerows. But then the amount of insecticides and herbicides and whatnot that they had to use were dramatically decreased. So we have to start putting what our values are. Like markets are really good at optimizing things, but we're not telling. Currently, what we've asked it to optimize is make as much cheap food as possible.
Right.
And we've crushed that. Like we've crushed it. I think it was 2006, 2007 became the first year somewhere around there that more humans started dying from overeating than undereating and infectious disease. Like chronic disease outstripped infectious disease and a lack of food as the main cause of death.
Really? That's interesting. It's 2007.
Somewhere around that point. Nobody,
That's the tipping point.
It's kind of a tipping point, but it's a really important point in history. But we crushed that imperative. We produce huge amounts of calories, but now it's to the point that people are so sick that we're crippling our healthcare system and people are unhappy. And
what I was getting at in terms of sustainability is that if you have a pig farm that is a factory farm, pig farm, you're raising thousands of pigs on a relatively small footprint.
Mm-hmm. What you need is more smaller farms with
spread
some pigs, and you need people to you need not 5 corporations to own the supply chain.
But this is a bigger problem. What I'm saying is, like, if you run a pig farm and you only have X amount of acres and you have thousands of pigs on that pig farm, that's the only way you're going to be able to raise the same amount of pigs on that farm. You're going to have to bring in food to them. You have to keep them contained. You fatten them up, and then you kill them, and you have this giant lake of their feces. This is what is the only thing that you kind of can do to have that kind of yield on a small piece of land. Relatively small. Like if you have 100 acres and you have 10,000 pigs in these fucking containment facilities, you're not going to recreate that on 100 acres with like the Joel Salatin method, correct? Like if you're going to do regenerative farming, you're going to need some land.
You're going to need some land, but you're also going to need to have a different supply chain. You're going to need to sell directly to consumers and not meat as a commodity.
But what about meat as a commodity to a place like Burger King or Jack in the Box or what have you?
They still do that. I mean, that still even
Joel
happens.
sells to Chipotle.
Yeah.
Chipotle is a pretty good source.
Right.
Like Chipotle has,
Yeah.
I mean, when you get like a good beef burrito there or a beef bowl, it's pretty damn good.
I mean, in a scenario like that, then I don't know how Joel handles his, but if you're selling to McDonald's, then McDonald's gets its meat from more regional source versus like this consolidated source the way that
Do you
happens
anticipate
now.
a time where they'll be able to, I mean, I know they are doing factory cloned meat now. Mm-hmm. Do you think that will be scalable?
No. Like the short answer is no, because it's so expensive to do it. Like,
But for now, like it used to be really expensive to get a cell phone, and now they're fairly cheap.
It's true, and I'm a huge fan of Moore's Law. It's a really good point, but the thing that kind of gets missed in this is that it's so expensive to run a lab. Like I actually did tissue culture, and you have to take all the products of industrial farming, pull that out, process it, and then I've got protein and carbs and fat in these jars that I put into this vat and then inoculate it with meat cells, and I have to keep it the right temperature, the right humidity. I have to
keep pathogens
off of it, so I've got to use antibiotics. There was actually been a couple of good business pieces like Forbes and stuff like that looking at these things, and some smart systems engineers looking at this, and they're like, there's just no way you're going to scale this, and people just, they don't realize like the grasslands in the United States or even in like Eurasia and whatnot, they're just enormous. And we have these huge tracts of land, sunlight, grass, animals. It's a really efficient system versus, again, trying to pull that all under, a roof like this and try to grow meat at scale. If you're on like a spaceship or something, you have a closed loop deal. Like I could see something like that working, but as long as we have the sun and grasslands and whatnot, there's still a really efficient piece of that. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but as marijuana has become more legalized, people have gone outside frequently to produce it where they can because it's just cheaper. Like the infrastructure of that versus like a greenhouse scenario tends to be pretty economically viable. So I think you run into those similar situations with the lab-grown meat and the kind of butting up against the scale piece.
Yeah, you'd have to talk to a real marijuana farmer, but I think there's some questions about quality and how you grow it and the soil, like the difference between hydroponic versus growing it outside. And yeah. What other pieces of the puzzle are missing in terms of like if we're looking at beef and nutrients and we're looking at the carbon footprint, we're looking at all these different things in terms of like a viable and sustainable food source. What other pieces are we missing in this discussion?
Well, I mean, one thing I was going to bring up is just with white oak pastures and the impact he's had on jobs and this town. Like he's in the poorest county in the country. And as we've
Where is
lost
that?
in southwestern Georgia. And to see what he has done on this property is incredible. And he sells direct to consumers, and so he can get a good margin.
And when he sells direct to consumers, does he have like a farmer's market type deal where they come to him? He ships, so he does it online. Okay. So you could just like buy a side of beef, a half a cow. You could does it by the pounds, cuts?
Yeah, but they also have
steaks?
restaurants that they supply to.
Okay.
But what the beauty of that, and also, some of the stuff that Wendell Berry talks about. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but there's a great documentary they did on him called Look and See, and he's an agrarian thought leader, and he just talks about how everyone from a small town, you haven't really made it in the U.S. until you've left your small town, and nobody's like coming back and actually working in their small town and loving the land that they're from and making sure that gigantic, nasty, polluting pig farm doesn't happen. So that's part of it. But as we've lost all these small farms, small town America has just completely dried up, and now it's just big box everything. And so if we're able to sort of dismantle these like 4 meat companies that control 80% of our meat and somehow get it back to a more balanced system where there's more regional control over the food systems, you're going to have more healthy small communities.
This gets out in the weeds a little bit, but when people talk about AI supplanting jobs, it's creative jobs that are going to be the last things that go. Like even doctoring and lawyering is so kind of scripted and rote that they predict that being a doctor and being a lawyer could be replaced by AI stuff in the not too distant future. But this process of regenerative farming is a really creative endeavor. Like you're problem solving constantly, and people have a tendency to relegate these farmers as just kind of like inbred idiots, and they're not that smart. Like there's an enormous amount of information that they have to learn about their local situation and what they're doing, and again, constant problem solving. So this could be one of these things that revitalizes Middle America and is a really long-term, job and employment and economic engine, is having people do more of this type of work. Like there was a time when more people worked in agrarian settings, and then we shifted into urban centers. And maybe there's a case to be made that more people need to shift back into a quasi-agrarian setting, both for the employment, but also for like the quality of life and the production of our food and different things like that.
Yeah, and I was just going to add too, the vegan dialogue works really well for like Norwegian billionaires and Bill Gates and people that can afford it, and they've got a Whole Foods nearby where they can get their goji berries and coconut oil and all those things. But for the majority of people, they want meat. They want to be able to eat it. And now we've got even science so corrupted that people are trying to pull it away from people. And so when you look at the nutritional ramifications of what happens when people have less animal source foods, it's not. It's a social justice issue. It's a food equity problem.
What was the motivation for demonizing meat? Other than, I mean, we know about the studies that were done that the sugar industry funded that demonized saturated fat, which is really, when you know about those studies, I believe it was in the 1960s, right? Where they were saying that saturated fat was the cause of all this heart disease, and they were trying to take the blame off of sugar. They only bribed these guys with like $50,000, which is crazy because those findings, so this is pre-internet, obviously, that swept through the whole country, and everybody's terrified of saturated fat, and people started drinking low-fat milk and low-fat this and low-fat that, and everybody got fatter. It's really wild. If you look at the difference, like people that lived in 1960s and 1970s versus people today, like you've seen all those photos of people on the beach from the 1970s versus people today. It's crazy the difference. And some of that has to be attributable to diet. So when we're saying science has been corrupted, like what happened? What's the motivation? If they know this, I know this. Like I'm not an expert. How the fuck do I know this? I would think that people who study food science know this too, and they would want to get that word out. Like, hey, this is not real. Like that's not what the problem is. Not saturated fat. The problem is not cholesterol. In fact, cholesterol is like the building blocks for a lot of hormones, and it's very important to cellular development, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are one of the, from what I understand, are one of the big donors to this global burden of disease.
So do you think it's a financial
there's
incentive?
Who benefits from meat being bad? Big oil, because now it's not an industrial problem, it's a consumer's problem, right? Just like recycling. Like you put it on the consumer. It's not the company making the plastic bottles, it's the consumer, right? So we've got big oil benefits. The ultra-processed food industry benefits, not only because they're the ones making this junk, but also it takes the blame off all the cereals and pasta meals and all that stuff and puts it on meat. So they're winning.
In the book, and I always forget what's in the book and what's in the film, but you dug into like the history of it. Interestingly, like Seventh-day Adventists, vegetarianism, they kind of founded the dietetics profession.
Oh, yeah.
So it had a very strong vegetarian underpinning to it because the religious, leanings of the Seventh-day Adventists. So
they founded
dietetics and nursing.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So a religion founded nursing?
Well, like Loma Linda University. So I mean, they're operating within science, but it definitely had this religious vegetarian orientation to it. Yeah.
And so why has there, the cattle industry is huge. The beef industry is huge. There's 95% of the planet eats meat, right? Isn't it something high like that?
The margins are really small though, because meat is such a commodity. It's like steak is steak is steak. But Beyond Burger, their margins are amazing.
But they're new. Like, is this an unorganization thing? Like, do the beef people, do they not know the existential threat to their existence?
They don't.
Really?
It's weird. It's weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're out there shoveling shit and oblivious.
Well, because they're not part of the coastal dialogue. That's anti-meat.
And I think some of it too is most of the players that own the meat production, they own like the grain, the corn and everything, because it's all consolidated. So they're like, well, maybe we'll lose a little bit there, but we'll make it up here. And
they're major investors in the plant-based meat as well. The large meat packers.
Just for money.
Diversify. Why not?
Yeah,
You're going to win either way.
Oh, criminy. So when you wrote this book, did you think that there was going to be major pushback? Did you think that, you'd basically shored up all your arguments with data and solid discussion?
I thought there was going to be more pushback from like the vegan side of the house, and there hasn't been a huge amount. And we tried to. We really, even in the point, is pastured meat more nutritionally superior to? We really like we had a discussion. I'm like, do we just lie about this? Because it'd be great. Then like everything is consistent. But one, I think the ethics are dodgy there. And then two, it's one vegan doctor goes through our work and he looks at it and he's like, no, there's a difference there. And if you can point out one glaring error like that, then it calls into question everything else. So we really, like, whether it hurt or not, we tried to be as honest with this stuff as we could. And what we have noticed is that we kind of uniformly piss everybody off. Like almost nobody comes away reading that book and they feel just super happy and invigorated because it filled up the buckets of like their preconceived notions. Like if you were really, really, really excited about regenerative ag, we sing the praises of that, but also we're kind of...
It's not black and white.
It's not totally black and white, yeah. Like we make the case that like there's all these other foods that could be nutrient upcycled that doesn't really fit into like the grass-fed model. So why don't we take advantage of that? So it's been interesting. Like the areas that we've had some pushback and the most aggressive pushback has actually been the really meat elitist kind of pastured meat scene because there are people out there that say it should be grass-fed meat or nothing. It's like, well, that's
interesting.
They're not understanding the nutritional importance and how that dialogue, grass-fed or nothing, ends up with New York City schools going vegan, right?
The grass-fed or nothing thing, that sort of the ideology, is that oriented in like a nutrition standpoint?
No,
like,
it's
why do they?
It's
is it a nature thing?
An environmentalist and ethical thing.
Right.
Yeah. And so they cannot tolerate the idea that protein, period, is important. We don't have enough regenerative meat to feed everybody. We've got kids who, if they just got enough meat in a disadvantaged situation, they actually might have a leg up. So we should just be feeding them the meat that's available right now instead of waiting for the whole world to go grass-fed.
Now, who's responsible for making Meatless Monday and No Meat Friday in these school systems?
So Meatless Monday is partially funded by Beyond Burger.
Oh, God.
And Johns Hopkins.
Really?
Which is a very anti-meat place.
Now, why are they anti-meat?
I don't know if they have some kind of religious background. I mean, Harvard is also, Walter Willett is very anti-meat, and he's funded by Barilla.
Anti-meat equals woke, right?
A lot of it, yes.
Part of what the ideology is today.
And then the Vegan Fridays is Mayor Eric Adams. I actually have a public letter on that. So I started an organization called the Global Food Justice Alliance, where I'm trying to advocate for the inclusion of animal source foods for people. And I have a public letter out to Mayor Adams on all the points why this is a horrible idea.
Do you know he's not really vegan?
He has been questioned, right, about
he's been caught eating fish.
Mm-hmm. And he says, I have a plant-based life. Whenever he is questioned, and he's like, I don't want to get into the nuance. And the Vegan Friday thing is just, I have a photograph actually that I sent over in the Dropbox of what the Vegan Friday lunch looks like.
Seen it. It's so sad.
The burrito.
Looking. Oh, it's so sad looking.
Yeah.
School lunch looks like shit already.
Right.
But taking meat away, and if you think about the context for these kids in New York, right? If you tell them meat is bad, they're just going to go to Subway and get a sandwich without meat on it. It's not like they're going to go get a tofu bowl somewhere.
Right.
And so, the top foods that kids love are mac and cheese, burgers, pizza, and chicken nuggets. And I would argue the meat part of those is the best part. And so if you tell these kids meat is bad, then they're just going to pull the meat parts out and just eat the fries instead and the Coke.
When a child is growing, do they have different needs per kilogram in terms of like the amount of protein that they need?
Yes, and we have major problems, even in developed countries in the U.S., with iron deficiency, which is one of the major things you need for growth, for your brain and for physical growth.
So the biggest pushback that you guys got was from the agriculture or from the grass-fed people?
Kind of what you would call the meat elitists. We had lots of people in the pastured scene that were very gracious towards the book and thankful and everything, but there's kind of a weird cross-section of like the health influencers that say grass-fed or nothing, and then also kind of the...
And what are they basing that on? Because I've said that. I've said that because I read it. Because I read it that it was higher in essential fatty acids, is better for you.
Yeah, so they don't like it when I say that because then that takes part of their argument away. It's an emotional decision. It's not a logical decision.
I've said that. I'm probably one of the people that
you probably told me.
Released that syphilis on a college campus, and then I did something crazy, and I really thoroughly got in and vetted the science, and it was like, it's not that simple. Like there's great ethical considerations for it. There are really, really sound environmental reasons, but when you just butt up against just that nutrition piece, it's just not the same compelling story on meat by itself. Again, like the dairy, eggs, seafood, huge differences there, but just not the same with meat.
And there's a lot of very large family foundations that are funding a lot of this grass-fed stuff, and they it's a very progressive platform that they're taking. And so to say that meat is healthy, period, it's all of a sudden I'm on the right and like not aligning with their politics. And this should be a bipartisan.
Apolitical.
I am totally apolitical on all this stuff, but I'm immediately tagged as a troublemaker if I say that meat is healthy.
We have so many problems with that in this country where people get so dogmatic and they're so connected to their ideology that they don't even question anything that goes outside of it. And this sort of healthy questioning and just reasoning and logic and just looking at data and looking at information and challenging your own personal assumptions, it's so rare. It's so rare. I mean, maybe you get 1 or 2% of the people, I don't know what the numbers are, who will like look at their diet and look at their life and then look at things like this and read a book like that and go, hey, maybe I should try this. Like maybe I'm like too rigid with this philosophy that I've adopted that plant-based is the only thing that's good for the heart and protects the environment and you want to be a good person, this is the way to go. You know, it's just so rare. Most people, they get something in their head and they just stick with that, and then their echo chamber that they exist in that reinforces and supports that, and that's all they ever talk about.
Yeah, and there's a lot of very large interests that are pushing the plant-based narrative, and then they have this grassroots army of ethical cheerleaders that are just backing them up for free. And then on our end, it's so complicated to be able to talk about the environmental piece. Like we have health influencers that understand the nutrition piece, but they can't really articulate all the environment. And then you throw ethics in there, and then environmental people don't fully appreciate the nutritional piece is that meat is good, period. And so you end up with nobody really advocating for meat, and also there's no money in advocating for meat. It just creates the headache.
They've just made that idea so it's so prevalent that meat is bad for you, meat is bad for your heart, high cholesterol, bad for the environment, you're a bad person.
That's why we call the book Sacred Cow.
Oh.
Because it's just this unquestioned truth that cows are bad.
And where's the documentary?
It's on Amazon.
Only on Amazon?
It's on iTunes and like all those like video on demand type things. I couldn't even give it to Netflix.
They wouldn't take it? Really? They probably have some funky deal with like some vegan programming.
You know, it's worth mentioning the folks that we were turned down from every single
No publisher would take this book.
So I'm like I'm not a J.K. Rowling, but my books have done really well. I'm more than 1 million copies sold of my books and everything. Like, I should be able to get a book deal kind of anytime I want to do it, and nobody would sign off on this. And then the folks who did were the folks
publishers
that publish
the China Study.
It's
a vegan publisher.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And they happen to also be Stephen Kunin's publisher too. Like
they're diversifying, sort of like the meat business.
I think they're diversifying, but they also they're pretty ethically driven. And even if in their team there were folks that were like, I have some real reservations about this, but this is a story that at least needs to be told.
What was the rejection when you guys got rejected?
It was always a different answer.
Yeah.
From that's when you know it's not really your fault. It was a different reason. Like, I think that this is already been told. I think that this is too complicated. I think that this isn't going to sell. And then the weird thing, and it's probably just COVID, but we would have made the New York Times list. Well, if the New York Times wanted to put us on the list, the first week we sold 7,000 copies, but Amazon only shipped 2,000.
Well, we sold out the day of release, and we were all over them. And this was my third book. My other books have done very well. So there was something really.
So you think
really
they were
weird.
holding it back? Are you guys
kinda
wearing
seems like it.
tinfoil hats right now? What is going on?
I mean, we really thought that this was,
A slam dunk.
4 years of work.
Well, let's see what we can do today. Let's pump this motherfucker
It won't
up.
hurt it.
Well, thank you guys for coming in here. And and so the film. Is there a trailer, Jamie?
Yeah.
Let's end with the trailer. And so let's let everybody know this book is available. You can go to it right now, right here. Sacred Cow, The Case for Better Meat. Diana Rodgers and Robb Wolf, right there. And here's the trailer. We'll leave you with this. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rob. Tell everybody how they can find you on social media.
RobbWolf.com. You can find all my stuff from there.
And Diana?
I am at Sustainable Dish and then the Global Food Justice Alliance as well.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. All right. Play this, Jamie.
There's a debate out there about whether or not we should be eating meat.
Red meat is now worse for us in our minds than fat ever could have been because there are so many more reasons to avoid red meat, not only for your health, but also now for the goodness of others, including not killing animals, and for the good of the planet.
You can't blame people for being confused.
They're trying to make really important moral and ethical decisions about what they should eat and how they should live. It's easy to fall for extreme, simple answers.
The majority of meat produced in this country is under such abhorrent conditions. We both are making reactions to the same evil, if you will. They're just different choices of how to do it.
But what if we're arguing about the wrong thing?
You look at the Midwest now in the United States, it's corn and soy, and corn and soy, and more corn. This massive amount of monoculture is having devastating effects on the environment. What used to be great biodiversity is gone.
The agricultural revolution has been transitioned into the processed food revolution.
If you want to fatten up your animals, you put them in a pen where they can't run around and get physical activity, and you feed them lots of grain. Humans are like that too.
What if the very animals we're fighting about are a key piece of fixing what's broken?
The animals are going to die, and your only choice now is to do it well. That is the only choice left. Are we going to be the death that's killing everything, or are we going to be the death that's part of the cycle of life that actually makes life stronger? Those are really our only options.